All right, hello and welcome to the Negative Modifier 2024 TTRPG recap, our Q&A, and kind of our end of the year show to wrap everything up. I know it's probably a little weird to hear me doing the intro, but most of you might know I'm Dylan. I'm one of the players, and I'm just going to go ahead and pass it off to Charlie and the rest to do their introductions.
Howdy, I am Alex, one of the players here. And yeah.
Ahoy, hoy. My name is Jad. I'm one of the players here. And this is our great handler, game master, as well as squirrel wrangler.
I am sitting here fuming that of all the goddamn times we've done these intros, none of you have ever helped me out that much.
Yeah. Players got to stick together, man.
So be it. Yeah, I'm trying to net the intro to once. Welcome to Beyond Table and Not about 40K in the year 2024. It's the lots of stuff for each of us happens in the year that's kind of tabletop RPG related. Never mixed in the podcast because we're not that type of podcast. And yeah, we have a little Q&A thing at the end of this too. We've collected a bunch of questions, some of them tabletop RPG related, some of them truly off topic, and I'm looking forward to that. Harken back to me and Alex's old podcasting days. But yeah, let's kick this off with a simple kind of joint topic of negative modifier in the year 2024. Our big things this year were Lover in the Ice and the Halloween show. 5 weeks, 5 completely different, in some cases quite long actual plays, all horror tangentially related. I'm not sure we're gonna do Halloween again that week. That was fucking murder on the producer side of things.
You got to do it at least once.
Oh yeah, no, like it's one of those ones where if I planned it better, we'd have recorded those across the span of like 2 or 3 months, which we'll probably do next year. But it was a nice reminder why I don't do the editing sprints I used to, which is that by the end of them, it's just me sitting there being like, I don't care, fuck it, yeah. I can hear Dylan's mouse clicks in this one. I don't care anymore. No, but I have to care, and I am fix them eventually. It's a fascinating process where the longer editing takes, like the longer it takes, like it becomes a self-multiplying thing, at least for me, where like I hit a point where it's like, no, you're going back and redoing a bunch of the work because like you zoned out for 2 seconds, and now you're 8 minutes into audio, and you're like, I have no idea if this is actually good or not.
Man, that's like the experience I have with reading.
So imagine in reading every 30 seconds, you have to scrub back 10 seconds because you're trying to figure out if someone slurred a word by accident or like tripped over the letter I intentionally or not.
Yeah, that's horrible. I have sat down this semester and read a chapter out of my book and then realized that I read it, but I didn't retain anything because my mind was elsewhere and had to do it again. So I don't feel your pain on the level that you have, but I have an idea.
I think the funniest one is figuring out when Jad is intentionally saying and when it's just trying to kind of think through a thought out loud, because there's a difference.
Yeah, what is all of our like, ums and filler words? Right?
Jad will also do the same thing I do, which is that he will say part of a sentence twice, and then the second version of the sentence is the one you actually go with, but you don't always know it's a double sentence until you're 2/3 of the way through the second sentence. So you're like, do I slice this together? Or like, but just fucking cut the last minute out of this type of thing. And you and I both do that. It's kind of funny. Alex says a lot.
That is pretty accurate.
Yes.
Now that I think about it.
You say you used to say like, you've actually stopped saying like a lot. Funny.
I don't know where that came from. That's
Yes.
kind of interesting.
Yeah. Of the three of us, you are the most likely to pop.
That is interesting because you've mentioned that on several occasions that's
Yes,
a thing.
and you're doing it right now, actually.
I don't notice it.
Now that you've mentioned it, Charlie, I just heard it.
Now imagine you have super big earphones on designed to amplify all these imperfections, and you have to listen to hours of your friends talking, and you know when Jad changes tongue rings because the clicking is different.
That is still one of the most bizarre experiences
Well,
I've had.
It's almost as weird as when I think a knife was set down in the background once, and Charlie was like, "Oh, is that this kind of knife?" And he was right.
Yeah, because my boyfriend was cooking in the background. He was chopping something.
No, that was a that was an insane fucking moment. Because there's one thing about like being really sensitive to like people's vocal patterns, but to identify a knife by the sound it made briefly through Discord is godlike, like hearing at this point.
It comes from many years of. We're way off in the weeds, but fuck it, we'll talk about this for a second. When it comes to audio editing, there is a thing called ear training, which is that you, over time, and everyone comes up with their own technique for this, of how they kind of get their brain and ears into the right spot. But there are ways of basically kind of getting your ears and brain into the zone, so it's listening for certain things more than other things. Like we all have S issues where we all kind of have to get run through a part of a program called a de-esser with some frequency. I mess that one up every once in a while, but of the four of us, I require the most de-essing, Dylan requires the least, and Jad requires almost as much de-essing as I do, or none at all. But when you require de-essing, you're like a fucking boa constrictor. You're hissing so much. It's kind of bizarre. It's like, it's not a consistent thing. I consistently need de-essing. There's just some nights where you are more snake-like in your pronunciation of things.
Yeah, my tongue split. So I know that, like...
Yeah, no, I can tell you roughly around when that happened, when you get that touched up or something like that, 'cause it does change the sound of it some.
I'm going to get it resplit sometime next year as well. Sorry, we'll be like out for like a hot second. But
yep, I'll boost up the de-esser for that one too.
I'm glad that did not end up becoming a big issue.
The nice thing is all these things are fixable. Like, they're not like, we are well in the weeds on this one. This is no longer negative modifier in 2024, but a full-on podcasting conversation. But it's very interesting because, like, the way I am capable of hearing Dylan's mouse click with like 9 different background sounds happening simultaneously that are intentional, or like other stuff going on. It's bizarre. There's a couple sounds that, like, to this day, hearing myself talk, I hear myself when I roll S's too much, and it bugs me in real time now. I've spent so much time listening to all of us while editing. It's kind of funny where I'm like, where's my de-esser in real life? I'm hissing again. No one will notice but me. Yeah, Lover on the Ice, Halloween stuff. That was kind of it for this year. We had a variety of production snacks. We kept getting sick or worse.
Yeah, that was kind of we had a wave of like, I feel like it was still better this year compared to previous years in terms of scheduling, because we did have some off days, but
different. Yeah, it's different.
Yeah, different in a way.
I had like 3 individual funerals for the same person that I had to attend and deal with.
Oh no, we were busy with things that take you away from doing this. Like,
I think it's rad that we also kind of made do with what we produced.
I will fully admit that coming off of Hawthorne's Crusade, that was my, okay, I'm not sure I can do this again anytime soon. So let's slow this down a little bit. Let's be upfront about, like, hey, we are not a weekly podcast. We've never been a weekly podcast. The fact we did a podcast a week for a year was a feat unto itself, and absolutely surprising to me. We managed to pull that one off ultimately. And then we had a bunch of production snags during not Lover in the Ice. What was it called? Jack Frost 2 years ago, I guess, technically. And I felt very bad about that. So that's when I was kind of like, hey, we're not doing this. Like, I'd much rather put out fewer episodes when we put them out. They're consistent, and I'm not so concerned about making sure I have enough our kind of timeline footage to kind of slice up so that we have something for every week. And yeah, I guess we kind of shifted more from a kind of scrappy go approach to things to taking a page from Arc Dream's book of it's done when it's done, god damn it. And I'd much rather put out a good product than something that feels hasty. Yeah, we had a couple editing mistakes in some of our earlier stuff that like haunt me to this day, where A, I just wouldn't make those mistakes anymore, but B, it's like, yeah, I'd have caught that if I was doing the triple listen I do now to stuff, where it's like, yeah, I'd have caught in that dumb little thing where it's like staticky for a split second. And I get it. I am the only one that notices that shit, but it bugs me to this day when I go back to some of our old stuff where I'm like, oh God, the audio quality, it's terrible.
As long as we're talking about how the sausage is made, I think it is very funny that there are no episodes of any of our attempts of playing Vampire the Masquerade. That is just
I still have all of them. I still have the recordings for that, actually.
Because that's 2 attempts, correct? 3?
That's just 1. We only tried that one once. And that wasn't so much it was going badly. It was more just...
It's a cursed game. It's a cursed game.
It's a cursed game for us. So this concept I referred to as kind of podcast momentum, and it seems to be that if we kind of like miss or kind of have to reschedule too many times, we just kind of start to lose momentum on a game. And I think this is kind of just true for tabletop RPGs in general. Like once the flow is gone, if it's not an intentional break, like us saying, hey, we're going to take a month off to record all this Halloween stuff or whatever, it becomes harder and harder to get back in the zone for it. And like that one was like every 2 weeks something was happening. So we'd get like an episode and a half recorded, and then have to take 2 weeks off, then an episode and a half recorded, then have to take 2 more weeks off. And we just never kind of found the flow of that game for us as a group. Like we may go back to that. I have Vampire V5 has changed a lot. I've run a lot more World of Darkness games since then too. I'm more comfortable with it. Like that is a game that I think has benefited over time from a lot more books coming out where they're like, hey, maybe we should have put some fucking rules for some of this shit in the core rule book. Our bad. Why the hell wasn't this there? But that's neither here nor there. Hunter the Reckoning is on the kind of proverbial list. I like to joke about stuff being on there. It's not high on the list because I think there's more interesting stuff out there for us to play than the World of Darkness games. But like genuinely like World of Darkness, I'm playing through the latest of the kind of not graphic novel, visual novels, the barely video games.
Yeah, the like text ones on Steam, like Parliament of Knives and whatnot. Yeah. I love it.
Even less than that. Like they're just like portraits and text boxes, and you make occasional choices. Like
Coteries of New York and whatnot.
Yes, there's 3 of those now. Yeah, there's Coteries,
Shadows, and Reckoning.
Yeah, I'm playing Reckoning right now. Shadows was pretty good. Reckoning so far has been fine. But yeah, it's my fascination with the World of Darkness universe has never faded. My tolerance for its games waxes and wanes. I think that's also one of those games that like I like being a player in a lot. I'm not sure I enjoy GMing it that much.
That's understandable, I think.
It's not match my style in some weird ways.
I will say that I've been looking at it recently because I picked it up in the Humble Bundle, but Hunter looks pretty awesome.
I think Hunter, it's weird. I genuinely think Hunter is probably, of the kind of V5 era of stuff, probably their best written. I think it benefits from a couple of the other ones coming out before it. And I don't know. I think there's something... This is the best version of Hunter I think they've ever put out in some ways. And I really like... There's plenty of issues you can point out with V5 and New Wraith and New Werewolf. I think the Hunter one especially does a really good job of like balancing the action movie aspects you want and the like, hey, this is all social soapbox melodrama stuff as well. And also like really drives home the idea of you are fucking human hunting things that can throw trash rocks at you. You are going to die unless you are smart. And I know, I think the fact that like the first campaign they put out for that thing, the first kind of collection of adventures, only one of them is vampires. One of them is just straight up a fae thing, and one of them is a ghost story thing. I think kind of speaks to them being like, we understand Hunter is weird and can't just be humans versus vampires or humans versus werewolves. It has to have all of the World of Darkness stuff going on for this actually to be cool. And also Supernatural, the TV show, is too popular for us not to understand that this is just fucking that too. Maybe we'll bump that up the list. I've had an idea for that one for a while. It's been gestating for a while. Like you all know me. I really love my normal humans versus monsters games, period. Like any version of that I'm down to play with a little too much frequency.
I mean, I understand it's a pretty attractive system. Their setting, I guess, is better put.
I just also love the fact that SAD exists in that setting.
Seasonal Affective Disorder?
No, the Special Affairs Division. They're part of the FBI that's job is to kind of keep track of vampires and werewolves and shit. It's just called SAD.
I had a lot of fun with the werewolf game that they had put out that was a visual novel. The extended kind of World of Darkness materials has been kind of popping up on my radar.
Yeah, it may be about time kind of thing. Like I think like we as a group have also matured. Like
have we?
In a different way. I think it's like this is going back 2 years at this point, but the difference us playing Cult has made about how you play games is something I can actually point to a lot of frequency. Like there's been a lot of changes in how you three play characters since we played that. The amount of kind of character drama that happens kind of thing. Like I think Lover in the Ice benefited from having had us play at Oakwood Heights relatively soon before we played that thing, where like the idea of people unsure how dangerous, I don't know, like it's very strange to kind of draw parallels between those. They're very different and stuff like that, but like every character since then has had more of a weight to them, I think, kind of had more of like a fleshed out life going on that shows up as part of the character. Like I think the characters have also gotten more complicated since then. Not that they were bad or kind of shallow beforehand, but like there's more kind of thought put into making flawed people. Like the Delta Green's always a story about flawed people doing flawed things for kind of what they think is right. We've always kind of towed the line between like, yeah, these people are flawed-ish, but kind of flawed in a cool action movie kind of way. Since then, they have been flawed. Where it's like, oh, you are bad people doing a maybe good thing for maybe good reasons. But also we played goddamn Lover in the Ice, which is like, you're gonna do some bad to do some good at best.
I kind of did notice that even with the plug and play characters that we happen to have made for SL, it takes like, yes, it does take us a minute to kind of get into it just because we're picking up like new folks and whatnot. But
Yeah.
I've grown really attached to the weird ragtag revolving door of S agents.
Yeah, me too.
I still think of Snail.
Well, I think that's kind of the point of it. Like it's one of those ones where we've always, historically, when it comes to kind of negative modifier stuff, we do longer campaigns for the most part. There is a version of Delta Green that's kind of the drop-in, drop-out approach to it. It's kind of the more open table approach to things. And yeah, this was not me saying, hey, we're not going to do kind of long-form campaigns again, but there's a certain charm, I think, to certain games where you do have this kind of drop-in, drop-out where it's like, yeah, these characters will develop or they'll die over longer periods of time, arguably more similar to what an actual Delta Green agent's life would be like. I think like there's always kind of this awkwardness of, man, all this unnatural stuff's happening real close together. Well, no, I'm saying it happens like several months to a year apart in game, but like, because we're presenting it as such, it seems like it's happening fucking all the goddamn time. It's like a true crime. It's like a true crime show that only does serial killers, where if you look at it, you're like, man, why does this one town in Illinois have like a new serial killer every week pop up? Like, how many serial killers can one small town support? It's like, no, it's happening out across the span of, in theory, a long period of time, but because of how media is consumed, it winds up feeling like it's like, man, it's like 1 in 3 people in this town a monster. And I think the kind of SL approach does a nice job of kind of making it feel more random and sporadic and kind of reactionary, which I think is a big aspect to kind of the more self-contained nature of Delta Green. That's kind of more of a tabletop RPG philosophy thing at that point. But yeah, we're kind of beating around the bush at this point. We want to talk about our individual years in tabletop RPGs. That was kind of the initial pitch of this, was the whole idea that like, hey, we've done stuff that is not related to the podcast or even each other necessarily, that's tabletop RPG facing or tabletop RPG relating, that's worthwhile talking about. I can start that discussion off if people want as well.
Yeah. Well, I kind of want to see what you've got on yours. I figured I'd just talk up a few of mine, but go ahead.
Not fair. Yeah, I probably, the simple factor of the fact that I'm a kleptomaniac when it comes to buying tabletop RPG books, I probably have a lot more to talk about in this section than I really want to. Yeah, this was an interesting year because the Delta Green Kickstarter I put money into, the second one, started delivering in December of 2023. So it's been a slow drip every couple months of like new Delta Green stuff coming out. This has also been the year that God's Teeth kind of more fully dropped on us, and all the stuff around God's Teeth, which has been fascinating to watch kind of unfold and have everyone's reaction to that. And kind of, I'm always a fan when Alex Green draws something new to read through that's new Delta Green stuff. And I've liked generally speaking, the stuff that's come out this year, I've liked a lot. I've liked kind of the kind of surfacing of the 90s stuff, which has been a lot of fun to see. And it's always kind of fun to have some stuff to read from them. I will say that kind of my 2024 started off bad, or not bad, disappointing, with the first thing I bought was the Alien RPG Building Better Worlds, which I think was kind of my weird, I'm done with the Alien RPG for a little while moment, where I find the Alien RPG absolutely fascinating. I do not understand the draw to run super long campaigns in it, and the Building Better Worlds thing definitely seems kind of geared towards, hey, I want to make an intricate planet where stuff happens. And speaking purely from my perspective, I look at that game and I'm like, no, this is a game about like chaos spanning a couple days as like the xenomorph or something, rips through your crew in a bad situation, or kind of like you have a slow escalation of like, man, people keep disappearing, and like those strange eggs we brought in from the field a couple months back seem to have vanished. I don't know. It's Building Better Worlds is a fascinating book where like the ideas in it are solid. I don't think it does a great job of presenting itself as like, here's how you actually use this. Like, from a fan of the Alien franchise, I enjoy that book because it's like, here's what a Weyland-Yutani plant's like, here's what like a competing megacorp planet is like, kind of thing. Like, it's interesting. Like the new movie that came out, Alien Romulus, I think is what it's called, Romulan or something like that, feels like the movie you would make if you had access to Building Better Worlds, where it's like, hey, do you want to see what a Weyland-Yutani colony is like? You do? Here it is. And now the Alien movie happens after we moved on from that type of stuff going on. And that's what I think that book's kind of always trying to set up. But yeah, that was kind of the first thing I got in 2024, along with some Delta Green stuff showing up. For those that weren't following this dumbness on the Discord, I managed to be as part of the Black Cube / Invisible Sun reprint of that. I'm really sorry to anyone that was totally sold on the idea that we're never going to make another printing of this again, but hey, I got a Black Cube now, and it's kind of stupid, and I love how stupid it is. Don't buy the Black Cube. It's a giant waste of space, but I find its existence highly entertaining. It is a fascinating tabletop RPG artifact of like, it toes that bizarre line between this is a board game because you don't need almost any of the stuff in the box, but like the stuff inside the box makes the game infinitely easier to run because it kind of adds a visual component to some kind of esoteric concepts. And I don't know, there's something about the fact that I have the Black Cube being used as a table that I have by the bin I keep all my tax information in, just sitting on top of it. I'm like, this is oddly Delta Green in a weird way, where it's like, here's this esoteric object, here's a bunch of paperwork right next to each other. I don't know. I think I enjoy the Black Cube as a concept more than an actual thing. It is oddly huge. To find a place that's oddly heavy too. I feel bad for the mail person that had to drop that thing off at my house. Yeah, I think you could easily injure yourself picking that thing up wrong. But yeah, move on to less kind of humorous things. This was a year I spent a lot of time hunting for, and I mean this in both a snarky way and a sorry, I'm going to phrase it this way kind of thing. Old Gods of Appalachia, the tabletop RPG, but good. Like, there's something about the whole kind of eldritch horror down in the holler type of thing I find absolutely fascinating. It's an intriguing setting and concept to me that I don't think that game did a great job of exploring for a variety of reasons. Most of them have to do with the system it's using, but also like that led me to Savage Worlds. I think it's just called Holler actually, which is close to what I was looking for, I guess. I don't know. I like the Savage Worlds system. We played Deadlands at some point. But yeah, it was every year seems to have a weird theme of me trying to find like this oddly specific thing I'm suddenly really into, and it leads me down a bunch of weird alleys and kind of backways of tabletop RPG space. And this seemed to be the year of I want Rednecks versus Cthulhu, and that went to a bunch of strange indie stuff that we may or may not talk about in the future, and kind of had me a bunch of reading, a bunch of small kind of one-page stuff, and a bunch of kind of fun little weird projects out there. But that was fun. The kind of surprises of the year were Dragonbane and Outgunned. And we talked about Outgunned some on the Discord server. And as time of recording, this Outgunned has just been picked up by Free League to be published or distributed by them, which is, I think, super cool. We've never talked about Outgunned on the podcast, really, ever, have we?
No, not really.
I just learned about it through the Discord.
Yes. Yeah. It is from the people it's from the Italian team that did Broken Compass, which was, so you want to play Indiana Jones, the tabletop RPG. It's a really good first showing for a small team. Broken Compass had a bunch of kind of half-bake aspects to it that I think like spoke to, hey, there's some really competent minds behind this. They're trying to do something neat, and Outgunned definitely feels like kind of the final product that you would get from the people that brought you Broken Compass. And I think the kind of cool aspect of it is they have gone the Free League approach where they've developed a system. I think they call it the Director's Cut system. And I think it's a really cool dice system. It's very similar to the Year Zero engine. It's dice pool based off of skill or stat plus skill type of thing, except you're not hunting for sixes. You're kind of playing poker with your hand. basically you're trying to roll multiples of the same number, and you then kind of are trying to get X number of those same number to pass certain kind of threshold checks. You're not looking for one specific number. You're trying to get like as many threes as possible, but also like if you roll 6 dice and you have 2 twos, 2 fours, and it's kind of the game of like, okay, do I hold on to these? Do I keep the 2 pair that only adds up to like a basic success? Like there's a fun kind of like more traditional gambling mindset to the rerolls for it. And the rerolls, at least initially, are free. Like the first, like the reroll on your dice is free. It's like it's encouraged. It's a thing where it's like, no, reroll the dice is like reroll as much as you want for the first round kind of thing. And then there's kind of some other stuff that goes along with it. And it's very similar to the Year Zero engine, but also because of this kind of matching mechanic to it, where you're not looking for one specific number, I find the kind of math aspect of it absolutely fascinating. Like it's really fun for me to roll the dice for this game because you're kind of doing the card counting thing in your brain. It's like, okay, I seem to be rolling more 4s tonight. Do I back on that? Do I seem to kind of like lean this way or not? It sounds like a simple alteration of the Year's Revenge, and they're not related as far as I know, but like it makes a lot of sense that Free League is choosing to partner up with them because it's a very kind of, I think, similar approach to game design where you have this kind of base system you're now spinning off into kind of, in their case, different settings. Like the base game version of Outgunned is very kind of aimed at action movies. Like this is not what's aimed at specifically, but like if you were trying to make a tabletop RPG to play the Fast and the Furious franchise, base version of Outgunned is what you want. It also can do like John Wick and some other stuff, but then they've also kind of spun it off into other stuff where what initially caught my attention was they had Outgun Adventure, where they're like, hey, it's basically the Mummy movies, the tabletop RPG using our director's cut system. It's retailored to align more with like the skills and attributes you might want from that style thing. And they also have like World of Assassins, which is much more John Wick aligned. And then they also have I'm not sure what it's called, but it's basically the Van Helsing action movie approach. So it's actually kind of they're already demonstrating how you can kind of like revamp and retool the existing system with some slight altercations to kind of face different genres of that type of movie. And it works. Not surprisingly, because I think it's a decent system overall, kind of like the same way like the Year Zero engine, but like it really does a great job of being like, hey, if you have the basics of this, you can jump into the individual settings for this really flawlessly. And also the generic version of this is fine. We've just also tailored for this for other kind of specific versions of it. And I think it's really cool. It was one of those games I was tracking for a little while when it was in its kind of crowdfunding stage. And eventually I'm like, screw it. This seems neat. And my gamble for it seems to have paid off quite nicely. Like it is a very cool game. It's a game that you're kind of looking for something adventure-y and pulpy without being too pulpy. I recommend checking it out. It's a fun game. It seems to understand itself really well. The team behind it seems to understand it really well. Like it's one of those rare games that understands the difference between a spy and an agent, where it's like, no, they're basically the same thing, but they're also completely different things. That and like I said, Dragonbane. That's not new this year, but it seemed to kind of take off in a major way this year, and I got to play a decent amount of that. Probably the highlight of that was on Free Tabletop RPG Day. They had this really cool, I don't want to call it a dungeon crawl, but it's like a spire climb. It's a thing that's designed for basically get as far as you can in 2 hours real time. And then there's a scoring based upon how you do for that. And it's been a long time since I played what I referred to as like a competitive tabletop RPG. And that was really fun to get back into. And hey, it turns out Dragonbane's a really good game. And if you're looking for a fantasy tabletop RPG, you probably should be looking at Dragonbane because it's really good and it does a lot of things unbelievably well that I think it's such a weird thing to talk about where people like I seem to be kind of doing the veering away from D&D game, which happens every 3 or 4 years, but like we're once again at that point in the cycle where everyone's like, I want like a darker, kind of more grounded version of D&D, and this feels like it's positioned in a way that it really should be the game. If you're asking for recommendations on that, people should be recommending to you. Like I will always probably push Symbaroum a little bit more than I should because I like Symbaroum a lot. I want more people to play Symbaroum, but like Symbaroum is born from Dragonbane originally, so my love for Symbaroum also kind of extends to Dragonbane a little bit. Like I love Symbaroum. I kind of want them to go back and retool that thing to work for Dragonbane. I think the overall mechanics of that game work a little bit better. I don't know. Anyone else play Dragonbane yet, or is that just me on so far on this one?
I have not. My tabletop is pretty much limited to what we play here.
No, I know. Yeah,
I've not played it.
I think it would be super rad to do a small little run.
Yeah.
If possible. I know that let me guess. Is there a sanity mechanic in Dragon's Bane?
I mean, yeah, but not really.
I think that means it falls under the purview of negative modifiers. So then,
is that our rule? There must be a sanity mechanic. There has to be 2 health bars. Finally, kind of the mission statement of the show.
Well, I don't know. It's like, I think it's just the ongoing thing of just like we slowly accumulate just psychic damage from the games that we play. And then in our little social scrums before you actually bring up the recording, we just give that psychic damage back to you.
Fair, yeah. No, and speaking of psychic damage in a weird transitional way, like this was also, I finally got into playing Horse Girl, which if you've not listened to that, want something weird, go listen to it. I have been wanting to mess with that game for a while, so that was a fun little excuse this year to get to play with that one. I know I'm probably the only person on this thing that cares as much about Horse Girl as I do, but really enjoyed my time with that, and it kind of actually got me back into solo tabletop RPGs in a way that I've not been doing for a while. Like the other kind of theme of this year was Charlie buys a weird number of solo tabletop RPGs and doesn't talk about that at all, because I think my biggest challenge with those is kind of carving out the 3 or 4 hours I need to play them start to finish, if that makes any sense, which is always my issue with solo tabletop RPGs, is kind of like I spend as much time prepping and running it for myself and kind of playing it by myself as I would just playing a normal table with someone else or other people type of thing. So it's always kind of this weird, like, why not just get a normal pickup game together if you're going to do this instead? And kind of getting over that's been a thing I've been doing this year. And I've played some interesting games. It's weird because I definitely played non-horror facing stuff with that with more frequency. Like I had a lot of fun with a game called The Merchant, which is just basically kind of like you're in a traveling caravan trying to sell shit to people. It's kind of a fun little experiential game of like what it would be like to cross a desert to try and sell shit to people. And I'm like, this is wholesome and I need this. Oh god, I'm drowning in quicksand. Tier 2, I coming in last at our Halloween stuff and being probably kind of like maybe not my biggest surprise of the year, but like this game is neat and I think more people should know about it. Scream the Horror, I've not been able to stop talking about since we played it. Like it has become a game that when anyone asks me for a, like, hey, I'm looking for like a one-shot thing, I'm like, have you looked up Scream the Horror? I continue to be ongoingly impressed with just that weird little game that could.
I will say that game was a lot more fun than I thought. In terms of just like, for like a weird one-off for Halloween and like all that stuff. Oddly enough, it felt like a great, like just simple. It's a great intro, like to tabletop game. I feel like.
No, and that's kind of the conversation I've been having where that game beat out, I want to say like 5 or 6 other kind of indie, in some cases larger than it, indie games that were just kind of, I'm like, I want to do a slasher thing. I want to do kind of something of this type of horror. We don't do this horror much on Negative Modifier. I want to do something that's kind of got that like 80s horror slasher vibe to it. And as I was kind of filtering through games, I just couldn't get Scream off the list, where I'm like, something about this is speaking to me. And I'm so glad it stayed on the list because like we've played some indie games over the years, like some true ass indie games. That's the first one I've personally played in a long time that I want to play again as soon as I do, where it's not like Honey Heist I enjoy, but like Honey Heist once every few years, I'm like, yeah, that's about often I want to play Honey Heist and stuff like that. Some other small stuff I played where I'm like, yeah, that was fun. I had fun with that. I never want to play this again. Scream, it lives with me when I thought it was going to.
I've been thinking about printing out the Scream rules and then laminating them and bringing them to like game nights.
Yes.
I feel like that's like a really great way to just have like, all right, cool. Here's the rules for everybody. You could just use like a dry erase marker to fill in what you need. This is something to just like whip out, get everyone involved, especially just because of the collaborative elements of it that I really just super enjoy.
Yeah. It feels like a game I should have a double-sided printout in my GM bag or something. It's just kind of, it's with me where it's like, oh, someone could make it. Let's play a Scream instead. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, I'm
now also trying to find a reason to name a random ass character Kitten Kowalski, because I can no longer just have that. That name just lives in my brain.
And on the Discord server temporarily.
For the time being, until we play something else or until we publish something else. I've just accepted this fate. It's
as one must. I think I joked about this. We're actually promoting this. So let's talk about Legend of the Five Rings real quick and how bad Jad failed at his one job on that topic. What was your one job, Jad?
To not let you buy Legend of the Five Rings.
What did I do, Jad?
You bought Legend of the Five Rings. I can't.
So much.
You're an adult, and I am like multiple miles away from you. I'm not your keeper, Charlie.
I know.
I am your enabler
on this one. Absolutely. Yeah. So let's talk about Legend of the Five Rings and kind of my weird ride with this year. I like Legend of the Five Rings a lot. This is not me talking about Legend of the Five Rings, actually. We'll play it at some point. I think it's a cool game. It's one of the few goofy dice systems I actually like. I really like its whole kind of stat system. My story with Legend of the Five Rings from this year, though, was the fact that its publisher's been going through some weird. And they're also people that make the kind of really popular Star Wars games right now. And I found myself in kind of a moment of panic, realizing that I was not convinced they were ever going to be printing new copies of Legend of the Five Rings anymore. So that sent me down a kind of weird, not quite black market, but like, hey, who actually has a goddamn copy of the core rulebook for this thing that's actually available, which I think they reprinted ultimately. I think I've seen it again out there, but like I think it's once again out of print. And this was powered by, not this year, but last year, Conan 2D20 kind of very suddenly went out of print. And us fans of that game found that, at least in my case, by what I thought was a fake Facebook post of them being like, hey, on this date, like a month and a half from now, you will no longer be able to buy this. And that is a game that you basically have to own every single book for it to make sense because of how shittily Modificus released content for that thing. And Legends of the Five Rings, with everything going on with its publisher and the people that own the publisher, and just also kind of licensing, and the fact that trying to research what the hell's up with Legend of the Five Rings kept redirecting you to the 5e setting book for that thing, became kind of increasingly like, hey, is this game going to exist in 3 months? And I think it's fine now. I think they're printing stuff again, but I definitely kind of triggered my conservationist instincts where I'm like, hey, I like this game. I'm not convinced I'm going to be able to buy anything from this game ever again. Let's see if we can track some stuff down. But with kind of the way a bunch of stuff has gone lately in the tabletop RPG space, if there's a game like that that you are considering buying, or kind of like have always had a passing interest with and haven't picked up at least the books you think you need to for it in physical someday, but like, I don't know, things seem to be weird in the printing space right now, and it was kind of strange to see, I think that's Freedom Flight or something like that, put out new stuff, but we're having just ongoing issues printing stuff that they'd been printing for years that wasn't like weird licensed or anything. So it's like, no, you own this. Why is this so hard for you to keep putting out new copies of? And there was a variety of kind of reasons behind it, but it was also like, this is strange and weird and questionable practices going on. And that kind of sucked to kind of find myself in the center of, and dealing with, okay, do I just go out and buy a bunch of dictionary sized tomes of this game that like I like, but don't like Delta Green levels of like, but that was not a unique thing that happened this year. And I think everyone had, if you're into kind of the collector side of tabletop RPG stuff, there's at least, I think almost everyone had a moment of, why the hell is this game so hard to track down all of a sudden? Which is a tad spooky, I think. 24 in tabletop RPG stuff. There was the 40K tabletop RPG deep dive stuff for a variety of reasons. Who wants to go next?
Speaking of Fantasy Flight and the Modificus stuff.
Yeah.
I have been attempting to find through means our the Star Wars RPG, and in the whole attempt to familiarize myself with Star Wars, because I will admit that I apparently did not know Star Wars very well. If you ask me anything about the original trilogy, I will not be able to explain it or to give you concrete details. I don't know how, but I just don't know what happens in episodes 5 and 6. But I somehow ended up just downloading a whole bunch of lore. And by downloading lore, I mean like sheer volumes of reading canon literature for the Star Wars. And it's just been awful because I'm realizing that these tertiary companies are now owned by the mouse. And so my X-Men facts and like my Star Wars facts are just now jumbled up in my head. My TTRPG history is more so just the written aspect of it. I've started a project that I have really only spoken with Charlie about, I think, where I'm actually writing a short story or novella length kind of origin story for David Benson Gaff, aka Firestarter, because I realized that the setting of Delta Green lends into some really fun just narrative opportunities, because you do have these situations where you, I guess, can be saved by this government body, but that government body is not looking out for you whatsoever. So kind of diving into that world, diving into narrative aspects has just been where I've been living. A lot of my RPG things have just been getting myself more familiarized with settings, rules, and specific games. The slight little taste of co-GMing or just co-narrating the action of what was happening with Scream really kind of got my gears turning to get back into being a game master or being a storyteller in that aspect. I initially went to school, or at least I was aiming to go to school for animation just because I love telling stories, or I love just being able to give narratives and stuff and just kind of have people experience that. But then I ended up not finishing avenue of my life. In a weird way, I've kind of come back to it, but just in a very roundabout manner. So hopefully in the future, I might be trying to put my GM pants on and give that a drive.
Yeah, I think that's actually a thing we should talk about in general. I think next year, maybe the first year, we have games not GM'd by me on the podcast, potentially.
Oh,
which will be interesting.
Spoiler.
We'll see what happens ultimately. I think everyone's expressed some interest in doing that at this point by now, too.
I did actually get to, well, not for the podcast here, but I did get to GM a one shot of Delta Green, actually. I don't know. I think it was this year or last year, but I did get to do that for the first time. And Jesus, the amount of I don't know. I got pretty nervous, but then I kind of got into my flow. And so it's a lot of fun just from the storytelling side of it. And I also can appreciate the kind of leeways we get here and there with Charlie with some of our roles or some of our actions. Oh yeah, no, you don't need to read for that or roll for that. You can just kind of go. There's a certain appreciation for that I have now, because when I had my players doing their stuff, there were roles and I was like, no, you got it. You're fine. Your skill is high enough for this. You're okay. That I can appreciate. But yeah, that was an experience.
The great thing about having just that
Just wait.
You can still hear it through the window.
I can fucking hear it.
Oh my God.
Oh, I just heard it, guys.
Don't do this to me, Chad.
Just for the record, everybody, it is 9 p.m. on a Monday.
Yeah, it's like a little peek behind the thing. I may edit this out, I may not, but the sound you're hearing behind Chad right now, or not hearing if I managed to fix it, is the fucking ice cream truck that's my nemesis.
This ice cream truck only shows up when we're recording.
Not even every Monday. That's the thing. We changed recording night. It's still fucking.
Some people's nemesis is Sweet Tooth. Charlie's nemesis is the ice cream truck that shows up when we record.
Which is funny because it used to be there's it changed days. It changed days. I don't see it on our previous recording night.
Bro, that's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
I love that it essentially followed you.
Damn, homie, he's jingling for a while. This has been
somebody's buying.
He'd stop if people were popping out. Dog, it's 40 degrees out. It's cold. We're in Southern California. We do not want to be outside.
I mean, I do, but I'm a psychotic person from the north.
You're from the East Coast. You have seasons. You know what seasons feel like.
My time in California has made me wonder if I know what seasons are.
Oh no.
Ice cream truck is still here. Once it starts moving, it's going to start jingling. Okay, he's gone. he's left.
We sally forth.
Mm-hmm. We're keeping this in though, right? Like this.
I
this
have no clue. We'll see how I feel when I edit it.
Fair.
Normally I cut this type of stuff out. You were saying, Chad.
I don't know. This is that train of thought has long left. I'll remember key elements as to how we got from point A to point or midpoint from a game that we haven't played in like 2 months. But if it's something from literally 5 minutes ago, who knows?
Yeah, that is always the danger. I'll find some way of splicing this together. And just kick off your next thought, I guess. I'll fix it in post. Don't worry too much.
The fishbowl's empty, dude. The fish is dead.
Fair enough. I told you to make show notes.
Oh no, it's I've lost my train of thought. I just don't know where to pick up from there.
Fair enough.
But yeah, I think it would just be a treat, specifically just because we don't really have context of you as a player outside of preview, like when you played what's her name? Branch?
I think Dylan is still the only person on the show that's actually played with me as a player in anything.
That's possible.
Yeah, and that's not like a recorded thing, right?
No, yeah. Yes, we actually do have. I have some of the archives from that may someday, once I kind of either feel comfortable releasing those or get a hold of people that I think could have some thoughts on that one. Yeah, they are a backup of a backup in a lot of way, and will take a lot of kind of cleanup to deal with. They've not been a priority by any measure, but maybe someday down the road, some very old at this point recordings may see the light of day.
So shall we go on to the next person? Or
yeah, who wants next?
Yeah, I can go.
Unless you got more, Jad. Sorry to cut you off. If
oh yeah, no, sorry.
I'm good. It's the ice cream man. That was it.
I can jump in. Mine is actually pretty quick. I don't really have a lot in terms of like outside of the podcast because like, well, I kind of live, further away from you guys, but also like I haven't really gotten too involved in the scene up here in the Portland metro area. So like haven't gone out to any games. I have checked out some groups and I might be dabbling in some of that, but honestly speaking, I will admit it has been a little bit intimidating to kind of do it just because like going into some of these games, like a lot of people do D&D and I have not played D&D, nor am I familiar with D&D in like as an actual like specific tabletop. As I revealed in a previous episode, my first real like tabletop RPG kind of introduction was essentially doing wasn't Delta Green. It was, what was that?
Tales from the Loop.
Yes. That was technically my first introduction into all this. So haven't really dabbled too much into that other end of things, but yeah, I want to. I just really haven't to. And I've also just recently been really enjoying some of the Warhammer stuff we've been kind of doing recently. Although like I do feel like I definitely need to learn more about it because there's just so much there. Even with our episode of we did the whole like let's introduce the basics, and it was like it's so broad. Well, I enjoy because from a wide kind of I guess forest view of it, like it's good, but like there's more I need to like learn specifically there. But yeah, my tabletop, I guess for the most part, has been really with the podcast. So any of the new episodes or new games we've played. I have a weird enjoyment of Cult. Cults just seems like a fun game, despite, the themes and all that. But I think it's probably tied to some of the moments we had recording this year in Cult that felt really fun. So like, maybe that's my kind of attachment to it. But I do really love when we kind of dive into, and so, but yeah, that's kind of more where my tabletop, I guess, experience or kind of new immersion went for this year.
Yeah, and I guess kind of my comment to throw a quick comment in there. We play this almost every week. That's more consistent than most groups out there are with some frequency.
This is true.
This year's kind of psycho schedule notwithstanding because of various kind of hazards. Yeah, I've said as a joke to several people, it's like, how do you schedule a group? It's like, what, like having a weekly group's hard? Really?
It's kind of funny because I know of the meme of like, oh yeah, the hardest part about tabletop is scheduling. And like, in some ways, yes, but like, we've been really good about getting our stuff scheduled and being here and like doing just our plays. So like, even obviously with real life stuff happening beside the point.
Oh no,
like,
I would say despite your relative newness to the hobby and concept, you have played more tabletop RPGs in a time manner and also variety wise than I'd hazard like a large percentage of the hobby out there at this point in some ways.
Yeah, so I guess that's kind of my like, mine is very brief, obviously, because like I said, I haven't done too much, but yeah, there's been a couple of new game introductions we've done, and it's been a lot of fun.
I don't know. Me and Dylan are the fucking power nerds on this topic.
Yeah.
Can I make a comment real quick? Yeah, I didn't know that Tales from the Loop was one of your first RPG experiences because I played with you with that game and I could not tell.
Well, thank you.
You dive into character relation really well. And it's one of those things that I actually had a question for you later down the podcast road about that. So
Sure.
For our listeners confused, Tales from the Loop was this kind of casual game I was running back in the early days of COVID. That was like kind of my alternative game stuff I was running. It's not a negative modifier thing. It was just I got this Tales from the Loop book I want to play. I want to play it with me type of situation. So no, you're not missing something that we glued from the archives or something. This was just a home game type of thing. Figured I'd provide that context.
Yeah, and I think the only time it's actually made a resurgence, or at least shown up in Negative Modifier, was during our Extra Life stream, where we had like, we start with Tales from the Loop, and if we reached a certain donation, then all of a sudden the kids we played in Tales from the Loop became Delta Green operatives. So
yeah, maybe we'll do some more serious Tales from the Loop at some point down the line. But I don't know. There's this thing called Electric State out there right now, which I really like. I think it's a really cool game, and they're making a really bad movie based off of it. So maybe we'll do something with it. God, that movie does not get what the hell that game is about or the art is about. It's kind of amazing. They Ready Player One the shit out of that thing.
Oh, did they? Oh,
but Dylan, is it time?
Sure, I can dive in. I've had a very complicated relationship with tabletops this year, but I have played a lot of them, probably significantly more than the average person. So I play Traveler a lot. That's one of my all-time favorite games, tabletop games. I mean, you guys know that we play Delta Green, and we've been exploring more of the horror aspects of things. I have taken a look at Legend of the Five Rings, and the system seems very complicated, but I kind of like complicated systems. That's something I sort of learned this year was I'm much less a fan of the rules light games, but there are some good ones out there, like Scream was really fun. But I prefer games that have rules for things that I want to do rather than throwing basically a bunch of stuff into like a generic role that you can make for one thing. Kind of harkening back to like older D&D where you had like a specific stat for doing grappling and disarms and whatnot. I kind of like having that variety. So overall, crunchier systems, which is part of the reason why I like Traveler a lot. I mean, I guess people probably don't know, but one of the main games that I play is the old like Game of Thrones role-playing tabletop game that I've been running for like 6 or 7 years now. We're on to our second game, and I'm very burnt out with it, and I want to end it and never pick it back up again. But I guess there's always the possibility that at some point I'll get nostalgic and want to. I also got to run the All Flesh Must Be Eaten one shot, which that game is horribly dated and the rules are terrible and it's crunchy and it's gross, but the vibes are like 80s horror movie, 80s zombie movie, and it was very fun. And it's always a treat to get to run one of those games.
If you had to pick a favorite, most dated part of that game, what would you pick? I'm thinking of a couple specific things.
Like a dated mechanic that I really like in that game that I think is just ridiculous is the math. right? So like you shoot somebody, and if it's a human who's not wearing armor, they take double damage, right? And if you happen to roll to hit them in the head, you multiply it again. And then if you have a certain kind of ammo, you might multiply it again. And if you're using like an automatic weapon, you might multiply it again, which it's really silly and dumb and shouldn't be a mechanic. But I think it's really funny when you shoot somebody for like 300 points of damage when the average like hit point total in that game is like 50.
Yeah, I remember that being a thing where it's like, and I just shoot down this building, apparently.
Yeah, it's very funny. Years ago, one of my like highlights, and you need a specific kind of people who like playing these kinds of games. I had players walk into an ambush after failing a bunch of rolls and failing to pick up on a bunch of cues about an ambush. And one guy happened to get lucky and got initiative and shot the guy in the front and shot him in the head and dealt like 200 points of damage and killed him right there. And that sort of set the tone for the new players that this is, it's like an unforgivable system or unforgiving system rather. And I like systems where you can die easy. It kind of feels like older seasons of like The Walking Dead, I guess, or other shows that aren't afraid to write off characters in the name of like story without it feeling like it's done for shock value. But yeah, I also got into World of Darkness a lot more. I have looked at Vampire 5th Edition quite a bit. I have some of the same issues that Charlie does with it, where I kind of wish it was a little more rules heavy, like earlier editions. But I do think that they trimmed it up quite a bit. And I'm potentially going to be running a game for some of my other friends, and we'll see how that goes, because prep for Vampire, at least in the way that I want to run it, seems to be a little more intensive.
Funniest message I got from you all year was like, hey, do you have any Wraith books? I need to know about Wraith. And I was like, don't do that to yourself.
I do recall that, yeah.
I was surprised I did.
Yeah. And one of like the hidden gems, I guess, that I started playing this year that I dislike in practice, or I guess like as a theory, I dislike the dice system and the way that Cyberpunk Red runs. But overall, I have enjoyed it quite a bit. And it definitely could just be that the GM is like really lenient with us and lets us get away with a lot. But I have fun with it. Combat's really crunchy and really long. So if you don't like that kind of thing, I don't usually like that kind of thing. But
so have you ever looked up the original Cyberpunk rule?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
How do you think they compare to Red, I guess? Because I had a similar reaction to I think you had, where I'm like, something feels too flexible about this.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it's missing a lot of rules, and that's because they're going with the general trend of TTRPGs where they're becoming more newbie friendly, so they're trying to make the rules easier to understand, and they're taking out a lot of the mechanics. And they do that quite a bit. I think that they refined combat quite a bit, so you don't need to worry about like hit locations so much. There's just 2 locations you can hit: the torso and the head. There is a lot less multiplication. It still exists, but it is not as prolific as it was in the earlier game. You only need to worry about dismemberment if you get critted. It's not super complicated. It's fairly easy to understand. I say that they've gone to make things rules light, but they still have net running as a side mini game. So I don't know. We haven't touched it because none of us want to learn it.
Yeah, that has the Shadowrun problem where it's like, okay, cool. Here's the second game you now have to learn on top of the game you already had to learn.
Oh, yes. You're the only guy who knows how to net run. All right, everybody else is going to sit out until we finish this. I'm running my own Delta Green campaign. It's a little off the rails, a little crazy, but I'm wrapping that up soon. And after that's all done, I'll probably give Charlie a rundown. And if it's interesting enough, maybe I'll tell you guys about it a little. What else have I done here? I looked a lot into the Expanse TTRPG that's made from the Fantasy Age system.
There's an expansion coming out.
I am well aware there's an expansion coming out, and I very much want to run the Expanse. I really want to play in it, to be clear.
Yes, I was going to say that's a game that I like to play in. I'm not sure I like to.
Yeah, because there's a lot of background stuff the GM has to do, but I would love to run it, and I would love to play in it.
Really now?
Yes. Because I really like the fantasy age system, actually, like the dice system. I think it's cool. I like that you in the Traveler game, or not Traveler, the Expanse game, your hit points are what you spend to be better at things. So if you play role playing games like I do, usually at least, I the one time I did play this, I was basically riding 0 hit points the entire game because I would spend it to make sure we would succeed on stuff or get to do really cool things. So I think that's a really interesting and cool mechanic. I've also kind of gotten to a point where I sort of miss a little bit of the progression from games like Age. Not so much like D&D progression because they're kind of distinct. You still do level in the Expanse, but it's not like it's not the same as D&D where you get a set of features that you just magically have. You get like a talent and you can increase an attribute by like one or something. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head.
I always find it funny that I think the Expanse is probably the best use of the age system so far.
I'm not surprised. Green Ronin is. I love Green Ronin as a publishing company because they
Green
publish.
Ronin is Green Ronin.
Yes, they publish some of the games that I love the most. God, they need to hire somebody to format their books better. There's no reason why there should be a section where it references where you have to go to like 4 chapters later to reference this rule, and then there's another rule within it that you have to go reference like 5 chapters later. That's just insane.
It's a fun behind the scenes thing. We were talking about mutants and mastermind or something. I think that's what we were talking about. And like in real time, Chad is flipping through something and he's like, "Oh God, you weren't exaggerating."
Yeah,
No, that shit was all over the place.
And I guess I can cover this a little because we did talk about mutants and masterminds. I love mutants and masterminds. It's a complicated mess, but I love it. I'm not going to get too much into it, but you can get really fun with that system. You can also get really silly with that system. And like every Green Ronin game, if you really want to try, you can break it. So don't be that guy if you play mutants and masterminds. Just keep in mind that everybody else is trying to have fun too, and you don't need to do everything. I'm trying to think because I'm sure that there are some fringe games that I've looked at this year that aren't coming to mind right now. I did briefly look back at the legacy games. I think it's called Life Among the Ruins. I've always been sort of interested in the idea of that game, but it seems kind of. First, I've never found anyone else who's played it. I haven't played it either, or is interested in playing it. I briefly floated the idea of running a Stars Without Numbers game. If you can't tell, I have a huge preference for like sci-fi games. But that's kind of the experience I've had like on the physical end, but sort of on like I don't know, like looking at the hobby as a whole this year, I have kind of found that for games that I have been in for years, I feel bad kind of saying it, but I'm realizing that I'm not having fun in those games. And it's not because I think they're doing a bad job. I just think that either their style of GMing has changed or maybe I'm just not getting what I want out of those games anymore. And I've been in some of these games for like 6 or 7 years, which is a little, disappointing to kind of come to that realization that I'm not having fun anymore and I'm kind of like stuck, especially in the games that I've been in for 7 years. I'm kind of stuck trying to stick it out until the end of the campaign. And the end is like in sight for a lot of these games, but it always gets pushed back. There's always another thing before we go and do the big thing. We get one step closer and then 2 steps back. I'm kind of realizing that like I don't get what I used to get out of tabletops when I was younger. You know, I enjoyed the D&D games where it's basically just a big joke and everybody is silly and not taking anything seriously. And one of the things that this podcast made me realize is that I enjoy it so much more when everyone's taking it seriously, and I do appreciate like comedic relief that comes in at times, and I do appreciate the comedic games that we do because it's a good step away from all of the intense stuff we tackle on the podcast. But it has made me realize that I have like a higher standard for what I enjoy now. I want players that are invested in the story and their characters and everything. I want it to feel serious. One of the big examples I have is one of the Traveler games I'm in. I realized that the 3 hours a week that we play, like 2.5 hours of it is people making like meme jokes the entire time. And the GM is part of it. So like there doesn't feel like there's any real danger because I know he doesn't want to kill characters. I know that you can make a joke to a big bad and he'll run with the joke and it'll be a thing. And I feel kind of bad because I've been in that game for a number of years too. But
You're touching on an interesting trend, actually. I feel like I've seen a lot of people talking about kind of like I don't know where I got this number from at some point, but I remember someone at one point telling me that like the average tabletop RPG group manages to last like I think it's like 6 or 8 sessions or something like that. Like most of them don't go that long, and there's like this weird thing where like once you go longer than that, it goes on for years at that point because you found a group that actually works. And I've noticed kind of anecdotally and around a lot of more people talking about how it's like, okay, I've been playing with this group for a very long time at this point. How do I break up with a group is like kind of the weird conversation I keep seeing pop up. And it feels like it's been a kind of an ongoing thing for a bunch of people in tabletop RPGs this year, like whether it's breaking up with a game or breaking up with kind of a standing group or something.
Yeah, I mean that is kind of like the issue I'm struggling with right now because I've noticed that like GM styles shift over time, and that's okay because so does my playing style.
Yeah,
but I just can't play a game every week that is it's just meant to be there for like a comedic game. And I understand it's totally valid for people who like to do that. I'm just not one of them.
yeah, no, and that's kind of never been our style either across the board.
Yeah,
everyone at some point hits a weird point in the hobby. I found where kind of like it's a reevaluation of what do I actually want to be doing with this, and yeah, it's just gonna sound real strange. I think a lot of people, if you kind of math it out from when COVID was a big thing and D&D was having its super high kind of heyday during that, a lot of people are in the hobby right now kind of having a like, okay, I've been doing this for 5-6 years, kind of depending on the person or something like that. Like, where am I at with this? You and I have been playing obviously longer than that, but yeah, I think it's kind of like just a major uptick in kind of concentration of that stuff in the last few years.
yeah, because I've been playing since I was like 13 or something. So that's God,
Yeah,
14 years now. But that was my year with tabletops. I'm pretty sure I didn't play anything else. Someone tried to drag me into playing a mothership game. I probably would have, but I did not have time to make for another game, so I said no. I guess another thing is I have a lot less time than I used to,
yeah,
so that be a big factor in why I'm struggling with the hobby so much.
yeah. It definitely kind of I don't know. Like, I feel bad keep bringing up COVID. Like it feels like this is the year where kind of I'm back to pre-COVID time commitments, if that makes any sense. 2 a.m. hits different now that you're older too.
I wish I could say that's the truth, but I've had crippling insomnia my whole life. 2 a.m. is like the time where I'm like, maybe I can go lay down and be asleep in like an
I
hour,
mean, there
hour
is a
and
fair
half.
point. I think I'm the person on this podcast with the closest to a normal sleep schedule, and it's still a nightmare.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. My sleep schedule is absolutely fucking degenerate sometimes.
I mean, your blood is like 80% caffeine beverage at this point, too, I think.
Fair. Not always. I've actually kind of reduced my caffeine intake a bit. I still do it every once in a while, but like, it's reduced from the past. I'll leave it at that.
We're down from 100% to 80%.
I've done the same thing in the last couple of months. I used to need coffee every morning, and now I maybe drink it like once every 2 weeks. Today I did drink an energy drink though, so maybe I'm sliding backwards.
I do it every once in a few days, but it'll be like some days or some weeks it'll be like, okay, I'll do caffeine every day, and then some weeks I just it varies.
I have to imagine Alex is like, I'm gonna wake up. I feel like being jittery today. Let's drink the caffeine today.
What do I have? Oh, a 300 milligram C4 energy drink. Perfect. That's how I start my day.
One thing I forgot to say that I wanted to say. I've already said that I very much appreciate the podcast that we do because it's very fun. We sometimes do very long campaigns, which is my preferred version of games. But I understand with like the podcast format, we want to be a little, there needs to be variety. But since I've been playing with you guys and you've been running, Charlie, I will say that it's very obvious to me that all three of you guys have gotten significantly better, and you weren't bad, but I can definitely see like the improved role-playing skills, and I guess just kind of the comfortable nature we have with each other when we play, because I feel like we can explore complex situations and character dynamics with each other in like a healthy way that's fun.
I think it's funny that Charlie had mentioned that he points back to Cult specifically as the turning point and where we started to engage with our characters completely differently. Because now after Cult, I'm just like, oh, I could just be aggressive to you and to like the other players. I could be argumentative. I could be antagonistic in a way that makes more sense for my character. Obviously, I want the narrative to continue and I want not to cause like discord or chaos, but in kind of creating moments or in like being kind of in a space, like I really want to find just like where that flaw is and just kind of bring it up. At some point in time, I'm probably going to play a fucking ICE agent, like a cop or something, just because it's like, you know what? I need to dive into that. And I just need to see and experiment with just how that would work out, despite it being completely different than how I experience the world.
Well, I think kind of, and I think Cult's worth talking about kind of the 2024 context because it does line up with some of the stuff we did this year in some ways. It's the game I point to where I think you all started kind of separating yourself more from your characters some, like up until that point, not in a bad way, but I think like a pretty kind of time-honored tradition in tabletop RPGs is you put a little bit of yourself into your characters. And I think kind of the veterans of the hobby have moved past that some, or kind of have stopped doing that to a certain extent. And I've heard a bunch of terms for it. I think the one I like most is called the bleed, basically, where kind of like your character starts bleeding back into you and vice versa. And I think for a long time, a lot of us were all kind of like, a lot of us get to the point where, like, yeah, our character feeds back into us some, we feed back into the character some. I think Cult, because you all were being forced to play characters that, like, you did not like, not that, like, you didn't like playing them, but, like, they were all people that, like, none of you as people liked who you were playing as people, if that made any sense. And it kind of forced you to really step outside yourselves in an interesting way to watch. Like, that one was fascinating to edit because how the characters were played at the start versus the end. Like, Jad, you just kind of gave yourself over to the good doctor where it's like, I am a bad person. And Alex went from kind of like, okay, I'm playing a nervous, emotionally disturbed person to here's how I think someone who's not me would be emotionally and disturbed in these circumstances. It's a weird distinction to make. And then Dylan had a character that, like, you can, like, this from, again, like, I spent so much time doing the editing for this stuff that you could hear the, like, I don't know how to react, and this was kind of like, fuck it, we'll roll with it kind of thing. Like, that's what the character kind of became, where it's like, fuck it, we roll. And that's very different from how kind of a lot of Dylan's characters work with some frequency.
Yeah, because I do tend to play like very focused and I guess driven characters. And the detective was not a focused, driven person. They were a mess. And that was fun to play.
Yeah, I think that game did kind of a good job of forcing everyone out of their comfort zone in a lot of ways. And it's very weird to kind of say, like, it did what I hoped it would do in some ways, I think. But, like, yeah, there's kind of some scheming that goes in behind some of the games we wind up playing or when we wind up playing them type of thing. And to talk about Cult kind of in a more generic sense for a quick second, I think it's a game every long-term group should play at some point. There are a variety of reasons not to, and I will fully admit to the fact that I don't think Cult is a game for every group, if not even most groups out there. But, like, I think it's a game, specifically Oakwood Heights, because, like, it leans into that PvP aspect. I think there's kind of a, maybe not Alex, but I think all of us have played in a group that's got kind of that PvP aspect going on to it, and that one just gives you full perspective. No, fucking fight each other. Do it. To cut loose on this one, you were all competing for one thing, and that thing is to not wind up in pseudo help. Spoilers, I guess. Like, fucking fight and claw and throw each other underwater at this point. Like,
yeah,
the point of this is to fight.
I will say that final confrontation we all had in the engine room was super intense, and I think we got some of the best lines we've had in the podcast in that room. And it was a nail biter.
I don't know. I think how that energy's continued forward in a lot of ways. Like, it's Lover in the Ice had moments that felt very Cult. Like, I think, like, the standoff when Alex's character died. Again, spoilers, something we played a while back, or a little while back at this point. Like, we had our first character swap in. It was cool to kind of see the fact, like, it's like you understood. You're all playing characters, but like, hey, there's this stranger here we kind of have a bit of a relationship with. We might have to shoot him.
Yeah, I think we talked about it. We got very close to killing each other in that intro too.
Yeah, no, and I think that's like, there's just little moments that kind of shine out in that feel very like, for us, post cult in the strangest way possible. I know it's a weird way to phrase it, but that's kind of how it came. Like, I cannot overstate kind of the interesting kind of like subtle nudges that game kind of pushed us all into, type of thing. And that's been kind of a thing throughout the year in a fascinating way to me, at least. Again, like, I spent a lot of time listening to us talk about the games and stuff, like, I go through all the editing process. So I have kind of a behind the scenes perspective on this, because I've heard us talk about the same sentence half a dozen times over, because I've had to go through that kind of editing process. But yeah, no, it's very interesting to kind of think about how, like, the ongoing ramifications of cult. Yeah, it was the last thing we played before we went to Lover in the Ice. That's enough reminiscing. We have rounded up a wonderful collection of Q&As from people. We're willing to move into that category of things. If done talking about our year in 2024.
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
So, Alex, this was your nightmare of idea. How do you want to go about doing this? Do you want to read off a question while I'll dive into it? Should I read off a question while I'll dive into it? Should I feed these into some type of Vocaloid and have a weird AI voice read these questions off to us and make my life hell in editing?
I would say, do you have some particular questions picked out that you wanted us to do?
We did not get so out that we can hit all of these, but got a request for the Wendigo story. I feel like we've covered that one before in a live stream or something. I think that was towards the end of Hawthorne's Crusade. I think that was the final live stream for that, but I can summarize that real quick. This was Alex's first time playing Delta Green. It was me kind of doing an audio test for actual play podcasting stuff. Okay, we'll use this to actually talk about another question we got, which was how has previous experience with podcasting prepared you for Negative Modifier? I think it's actually an interesting kind of synergy we do, because me and Alex used to do a kind of gaming podcast called the Wicked Awesome Cast. Me and Dylan met through a failed actual play podcast. Jad and the various hobbies you've had, I'm sure you've run across the podcast or two at some point.
Like, I've done radio shows.
Yeah.
And I have a dabbling in acting and whatnot. Once I realized that tabletop RPGs was everyone just locks themselves in a room and just improvs at each other with math, I was like, all right, cool. I'm chill with that. But I think it's the various experiences with podcasting and non-podcasting that makes it very interesting, because it's not like any one of us is trying to one up each other to become the star of the experience. It's not like I'm trying to one up your joke, which I really do appreciate, in that we are a little bit more of a serious group, because Charlie GM'd for a previous group that we had where it was just kind of like shenanigans on shenanigans. And while I appreciate some levity with the story, if we are just making a Looney Tunes episode, I would like that to be made explicit for the day. So that way I'm not coming in and like trying to figure out like what dramatic twist or what sort of thing is happening with like my character, you know? So that's, I guess, my experience, my previous experience, and that's what I bring into Negmod.
No, so, and like, I guess kind of build off that for a quick second. The reason I kind of linked this to the Wendigo story is
that was like my transition. That was like my transition into like a little bit more of a serious play.
I linked these together for a reason. So I come from a very kind of production heavy background. Way the hell back when I was a roadie and I also did theater and stuff like that. Never acted, did behind the scenes stuff. So I've kind of got a wide breadth of experience when it comes to editing and kind of all that stuff that goes along with that. So from a previous podcasting experience, knowing how to edit audio was sure a help for coming into this thing. Didn't have to learn all that on the job, which is where a lot of podcasts die, because the hardest part of podcasts is editing. Knowing how to do that from the jump, definitely helpful. But I also kind of something that's not talked about a lot in kind of the consumer side of podcasts, maybe it is more these days, there's a concept of producing a podcast. And that means a variety of things to a variety of people. But in broad kind of stroke spectrums of things, generally speaking, a podcast producer's job is to keep the podcast moving and kind of on a certain amount of topic. And that's actually not as easy as it sounds. A lot of podcasts have someone whose job is to just be the producer. A lot of kind of more talk show style stuff, they will have a person on the podcast whose job is the podcast producer. Their job is kind of maybe a little bit audio mixing or something, but it's also kind of a little bit maybe fact checking or just kind of kicking things along and making sure like ad breaks wind up as part of it. In actual play stuff, that's often the job of the GM, but playing tabletop RPGs for podcasts is different than playing tabletop RPGs for just pure fun. Don't get me wrong, we have fun doing this, but like I definitely tailor some of the stuff we do specifically to kind of what works better for podcasting. Because I have to approach it from that producing aspect of it too, kind of thing, to kind of keep it going. Like no one wants an episode where we all fight about whether or not the shotgun damage is valid or something like that. We just have to have a strong ruling on that and move the fuck on type of thing. And having experience with that type of production actually kind of helps Negmod because I'm not figuring out a bunch of that stuff as we go. And the infamous Wendigo story, kind of like why it's become the infamous Wendigo story, is in a bizarre way, everything that could go wrong from a podcast perspective went wrong in that recording. And like to the point where I just kind of shut off the recording equipment. I'm like, fuck it, we're not doing this type of thing. Like it's not worth salvaging. Like one of the players was spinning a bolt during that kept making like a clacking sound. Like, and it's dumb stuff you think you shouldn't have to learn, but you have to learn, where like I have to keep part of my brain turned on constantly to listen for weird audio hiccups and make a judgment call about whether or not I think I can fix that in post, or if it's like, hey, can you say that again? Or like, can we pause for 2 seconds with our infamous Ice Cream Man nemesis and stuff like that? Like it's silly stuff like that you think like I'm saying it and you're probably listening to this going, oh yeah, I totally know what to do in that case. But it's like, do I break Jad's flow on this because maybe we won't get this back again? But it's also like, I'm not sure I can edit out the sound of that steam whistle in the background that came out of nowhere or some shit like that. It's not an actual example. It's an exaggeration. But yeah, like the Wendigo story is a pretty simple one. It was pre-Jack Frost coming out, so my understanding of Wendigos was not quite as good as it should have been type of thing, but right, not bad, but it was different. It was more kind of folktale, human people eater driven, but it's a simple story of Alex's character getting infected with Wendigoism, almost eating a bunch of people, some truly insensitive to cultural kind of history, sideshow attractions leading to an abandoned ski lodge where I think we had 2 player deaths, technically 3.
I don't know, but I remember yeah, I think I was playing Florence for that.
Yeah, that was kind of, and that was also kind of a personality test. So again, going back to the kind of like past experience stuff, just because you and your friends make each other laugh does not mean the rest of the people find you entertaining. And while I never held official tryouts for Negative Modifier, there were tryouts.
Oh,
I didn't understand exactly the group that I was going into, and so when it was like G-Cell, name yourself, or M-Cell.
No, that was
It was
G-Cell.
It was M-Cell because it was like, all right, name yourself an M name. And I was like, McGangbang. That's like my favorite thing to order at McDonald's.
And I fully admit there was a little bit of a test with that kind of thing where it's like, okay, who winds up thinking this was stupid? And Chad was the person that thought that name was the stupidest by the end. I'm like, okay, cool. Chad can do this.
I don't know the vibe of the game. Yeah. This was like, all right, you brought me in. And
you
like
had a character moment where you were like, oh God, why did I pick this code name? It was amazing.
Another interesting thing about the Wendigo story is that I think it did shape a little bit how Hawthorne's Crusade went because of characters' previous experiences. That's how Florence and Firestarter met.
Which is so funny.
Yeah. I couldn't join you in the future episodes because I got a special serving at the end.
That's true. It was Florence who did it, I think.
Yeah.
Buckshot retirement, courtesy of Florence.
Yeah. Also, by the way, fun tidbit on that. If I recall, Florence had the worst in, like, I guess, like gun play in terms of a stat.
Firearms,
and
yeah.
And firearms. And somehow fucking nailed it on the first shot.
Yeah, Florence was. I can't remember what she was at the end of Hawthorne's Crusade, but in the Wendigo story, she had 20 firearms. Them's the dice, though.
Yeah, no, 100%. Them's the rolls.
Yeah, I think kind of we give a certain reverence to the Wendigo story. Like, it's not even my favorite story I've come up with. It's more just kind of this funny kind of like screen test for a lot of things. I think like helped me iron out a bunch of the kinks for kind of how we were going to do some of this stuff. And that was pre-Craig, which is the recording program we use and stuff like that. Like in a lot of ways that like the TV reference for a quick second. Some shows air their pilots, some shows don't. That was kind of the proof of concept of, okay, yeah, I can kind of keep this going. And like, I think I have the crew for this type of thing, I think sort of assembled. And yeah, let's make some adjustments. Let's kind of fine tune some stuff. But I think that's why we talk about the Wendigo story so much, is that it was kind of this beautiful, messier version of Negative Modifier.
It was season 1 of Parks and Rec.
Yes.
Like, it's there.
Just season 1. Yeah.
There's a reason that also that and the Last Things Last, where Alex gets to fight a thing in a chair, does a fucking ladder match with the thing in the tank.
Yeah.
And gets wiped, is no longer on the main feed. It's still on the YouTube channel if you want to listen to that. But yeah, there were a couple kind of like, okay, let's try some stuff out and kind of see what sticks. And it's fun to have out there for a little while. But yeah, let's maybe quietly remove this from the main feed now that we're doing better stuff. And there's now 2 Last Things Last in there. One that's an hour and a half long and one that's like 4 hours across 4 episodes. More indicative of the final product, if you will.
I still have never played Last Things Last.
Yeah.
I want to say congratulations to you, Alex, because you were the first player I've ever seen get in or heard get into the tank, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a knack for getting players to get in the tank. I'm not sure why.
You present situations to us in such an enticing manner. Like, what do you mean? There's an entire Alias box set just hanging out inside of this fucking green box. Why is it in this green box?
Don't worry about it. Yeah, no, I actually ran Last Things Last for a kind of a pickup group for people I know, and it was the first time that ever had a game master lie to them about something. Like, you can't do that. I'm like, yes, I can. That's what I'm supposed to do in this game. Like, it was this shocking moment of like, you tricked us. I'm like, I'm on the monster's side, so yes. I wanted to win. Why? Because it's funnier. I do think we covered it in more detail in the final live stream for Hawthorne's Crusade. Yeah, so that's probably on YouTube. Definitely over on the Twitch if we ever use that ever again. But yeah, moving on from that. We got a question about where we all picked up our Lovecraft lore. Mine's simple. I've been reading that shit since I was like 12, way too young to be reading some of that stuff, and it just kind of exists in my brain. And part of why I love the Handler's Guide is because it doesn't so much add lore to it as it kind of adds historical context to Lovecraft shit I already knew about or other people had already expanded upon. Like, I'm not saying Delta Green doesn't add a shit ton to the Lovecraft kind of history timeline. It more provides context and coherency and kind of an explanation as to why weird stuff was happening, if that makes any sense. I think, Jad, you also have a similar thing reading Lovecraft shit for...
I was reading Lovecraft in high school as a very misguided youth, unfortunately. And so a lot of that themes and elements of Lovecraft did not translate well. And I am now kind of re-diving back into Lovecraft with a better lens of just understanding kind of like why this type of work was so influential and why this type of work is so referenced in like contemporary horror. It's been very interesting and very intriguing. That's why I've been very engaged in other people's contemporary usages of Lovecraftian mythos. If you are a subscriber to the Patreon, you can check out the book club that we have where we just kind of dive into a couple things here and there. One of the most not contested books, but Charlie and I have very differing opinions on Wintertide by Emerus. Can't remember their last name.
Ruth. I think Emerus was their last name.
Ruth Ann Emerus or Ruth Emerus?
Yeah, something like that. I've just purged everything my brain ever knew about Wintertide.
Ruthanna Emrys, there we go. It's one of those things where I refer back to Charlie because of his strong knowledge and strong grasp of Cthulhu mythos. He's able to explain a lot more behind it, and it's just been a really kind of phenomenal growth or phenomenal like it's been fucking helpful to have a mentor to like kind of point out different pieces here and there with Lovecraft.
My answer to this question is much more simple. I was not into it at all until I started playing Delta Green.
So mine is from video games, actually, oddly enough. Not a lot of book, but more video games, specifically two. One of them, which kind of does their own take on Cthulhian lore, but it's just like old god stuff. It is World of Warcraft, because I play that, even though it's not. They use similar names, but it's like not exactly it. It's like ketchup and catsup, if you will, type of scenario. But the other game that I played, and actually odd enough, I played this with Charlie, where I kind of dove in a little bit into the Cthulhian mythos, was Secret World, which was an MMO that was a thing for a while.
Oh, that thing has become so weird. It's now an MMO that became a worse MMO that became a tabletop RPG setting for 5e that now is a Savage World setting that's absolutely fucking fantastic.
Talk about an evolution for a game that like just gets like it had its own like thing, but yeah.
That is a game that I played and I'm like, man, this is a cool MMO. It probably should be a tabletop RPG though, and sure enough.
Yeah. So, but that game kind of delves into like some Cthulhian mythos and stuff like that. And
More
Charlie
than
and
like the first zone of that game is just straight up New England, and there's deep ones, and like a chunk of the missions take place on Lovecraft Lane. It's not so subtly named for H.P. Lovecraft. Like, it's not subtle at fucking all what it's trafficking in, and it's great as a result.
Yeah. So, but that was I guess the other source of it. And I do remember, I don't know if it exists anymore, but we had recordings of playing that, I think, for Wicked Awesome Cast or something.
Yeah, I think that's still out there somewhere.
Yeah. So if anyone's interested, you can go find the old Wicked Awesome Cast recordings of us playing.
You get to watch me die a bunch in that. I was not good at that game in hindsight. I refused to learn MMO class builds, and I still do.
But yeah, that's the kind of extent of my lore on that front.
I guess I will throw the note in here that, like, I joked that I had a note about this, my kind of notes for this actual podcast of this. Like, the amount of research that goes into any of the stuff we play for mine when I'm running stuff is hilarious. The amount of stuff I prep to have answers for, kind of a gist for, that like half the time doesn't become relevant is high. Like, all of my notes, everything we run have like a bunch of wiki articles I have links to for quick reference and stuff like that like are just tangents I went on while researching some of this shit, and Lovecraftian stuff specifically, where it's like, okay, what's the origins of this? Here's like 9 other details that are important to have a kind of concept for this or something like that. Like, it's Lovecraftian stuff is interesting, I think, because it's very much born of H.P. Lovecraft's fear of the world around him because he was a bigoted shut-in. And I think you get some fascinating horror out of that because the man was just afraid of the world and everything that wasn't exactly like him, which is where you get some of the kind of more interesting concepts that make for the best monsters, even though they have kind of exceptionally problematic origins. And having a better sense of some of those origins occasionally, I think, actually is important when you're running some of this stuff or talking about some of this stuff. So like I will very often have like a bunch of articles like linked in my show notes of like, hey, here's why this shit was racist. Just so you have some context, you have to have some mental reference to it. And like, maybe it's just something to bring up every once in a while or something, or like maybe don't play this angle of it and have to remind yourself constantly of it. I don't know. Like, a lot of research happens to kind of like flesh out any of the stuff we run to, because I also enjoy research and it's fun to a certain extent. Dylan, here's a question just for you that only you can answer.
All right.
How did you die in the Driver?
God. So Driver, right? I died back at the bank.
Right? You weren't even in that game. Yeah.
Yeah, I died back at the bank.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I got kind of greedy and told them to, get out to the car and I'd be out in a minute. And, the cops just happened to walk in as I was stuffing more stuff in my bag and I got. Nothing fancy. I'd be a bad criminal.
Dylan, I also have a very specific question tailored to you. Where did you first learn about ricin? I went on a fucking Wikipedia spiral after that episode with the cultists in the mess hall. I was like, what the fuck is ricin? And suddenly,
you're talking about the Century Club thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where I decided that we should try to do something completely
Little Tyke's first chemical attack.
I don't think was it ricin or was it anthrax?
You said ricin, and I had to shut that down because I also know a bunch about ricin and knew, like, in the same way that negative modifier should not be a source for how to make dangerous things. I'm like, I'll acknowledge you can make ricin. We're not going to go into this, though. We're going to find some way of transitioning off of this because I know how to make ricin.
Yeah, because I was playing the perfect character to make it too.
Yeah.
So, I am not exactly sure where I learned about ricin, but it was a very long time ago. And it definitely had to do with some very questionable things that have happened in American history with ricin.
All right.
There was also, and this is where I learned about it, so I'm guessing there was a year where every single fucking procedural show had a fucking ricin episode.
I would say maybe that was the case because Breaking Bad referenced ricin as an actual plot point in terms of like a weapon being used. So it wouldn't surprise me that when that became a thing, people all of a sudden caught on. It was like, oh, we have to mention ricin at some point because of, what it can do and whatnot. But that would be my assumption. I would actually be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if we go back and look at some of those shows that were having a ricin episode and see where along they correlate with Breaking Bad being a thing.
That's an interesting. I hadn't seen Breaking Bad at that point, but it's a good thing that Charlie shut it down because I had a whole plan for it.
Oh boy!
Which I want you to know that, like, I don't just think about like this stuff, but yeah, I don't know. It was partially like I had thought about, what's a good way to do this without us really being in danger, and then I was like, is this actually something that Florence would do? And at that point, I was like, yeah.
It is completely something Florence would know how to do, and given the nature of it, could do surprisingly easily. Yeah.
Yeah, because part of the question I had when I was thinking about it was like, would Florence be willing to do it? And I was like, well, definitely, because in Florence's backstory, which I don't think we ever really dove into.
We've talked about it once or twice, but yeah.
Yeah, she killed a lot of people to stop like an unnatural thing from spreading. So, but we got an alternative, which was that gas.
Yeah, we just committed war crimes instead.
Yeah. No, that was be very much pivoting into like, let's commit a wacky war crime now to avoid the very real war crime we were about to talk about.
I think one of the, or probably like the most interesting things about the end of that episode was the fact that I hadn't really thought about it, but you had, Charlie, that Florence, because she was part of like the emergency CDC response team, was somebody who responded to that attack and had to see the aftermath of everything we did.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Which worked out because Florence was just able to cover everything up for us. But that was a nice little note you would put in.
Someone who enjoys kind of playing around with the ideas of like, what's the weirdest place a handler could give a Delta Green group a like read-in or something like that. I'm like, oh yeah, it would totally make sense that like Delta Green would be like, oh, there was an operation that an agent was involved in. Go fucking make sure you cleaned your shit up.
Mm-hmm. It made sense. Like Florence, that's I don't think that's a super prolific team.
No, it's a strange viral outbreak. Who's there? Bouncing around on this. Let's do some character stuff for a second. Everyone got a favorite character they've played, and why?
Ooh,
back to Colt, Dr. Domri, because the whole hidden mechanic of here's your dark secret, and then you handed me mine, and I was a serial killer.
Yeah,
a serial killer who targeted mentally ill teens. I was like, let's fucking roll with it. Let's roll with it. Let's see. And I think that really, really put a fire under my ass to make sure that I executed this well. Because there wasn't really a correct answer. I was like, I don't know how to fucking do this in a way that is like, all right, here's whatever the fuck. But it's like, let me be as responsible as I can to make sure that this person is a terrible person clear first and foremost, but in a weird way, compelling. Like, please don't root for me, but please just see that I am an evil woman.
I want to be entertaining, but not entertaining enough that you like.
Mine's fairly simple. I get nostalgic about characters very quickly, but mine's probably Florence. I appreciate how just awful Florence was as a person and how little that actually came out, and as I guess awful as in like her backstory and everything. Because I think it was pretty obvious that Florence was not a good person by the end of Hawthorne's Crusade. But I very much enjoyed exploring that character with you guys, building her into what she was. It was kind of I'm nostalgic for it because it was the first campaign we played together.
If I had to pick, well, I'm going to separate it into two categories: pre-made and one that I actually worked on myself.
Sure.
So obviously the one that I worked on myself, Javier, he was one of my favorites. There was something about him that I just really enjoyed. Or no, what was it? Well, Javier was his photo, but yeah. Anyway, my Delta Green character that we did Hawthorne's Crusade with, that was maybe because I got to evolve that character and I didn't really know where I was going to start with it, and then it just became something more. But yeah. And then as far as pre-made, Cult. When we did the campaign with the first Cult game we did, actually, that one was also really, really fun. Because that, again, I have to agree with Jad. Like, the whole dark secret thing really throws a whole like curveball at you, and like trying to play that was a very interesting kind of perspective, because the character was clearly traumatized, and like being able to kind of dabble in like, I guess, role-playing aspects of PTSD while being respectful felt really good. And there were some tense moments with that character, and it was really enjoyable. I really enjoyed playing that. Those would be my two.
All right. No, it makes a lot of sense. I have not played a character, so I have a good one for this. That's not true. Fucking Century Danny.
Oh, Danny. Oh, I love him so much, the poor guy.
That or fuck, what was his name? The serial killer from Weirdwood.
Oh,
Frank?
Yeah.
Oh no, the from Weirdwood.
Jimmy?
Never mind.
Yeah, I think it was Jimmy.
I know his voice. Yeah, no, I always have a lot of fun when I get to force you all into kind of an uncomfortable situation where like it's uncomfortable for you as a person, but your character is like, oh, motherfucker, this is what I'm bad at.
Oh, how we sent the most fucking like
socially inept.
Yeah. Socially inept. Please do not make me do this fucking person to be the honeypot.
You fucking sent the slightly kind of socially awkward doctor to chat up the incel serial killer. Yeah, it's how could this possibly go wrong?
Listen, we did some horrible things in Weirdwood. An innocent got God.
Yeah. I mean,
but it worked.
To be fair, we were just, I think Weirdwood took place after Century Club, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, to be fair, pretty bad, but we were coming down from the high of war crimes. So
You're right.
I mean, like, no, you were coming off of getting your shit kicked by a house.
Oh my God, dude.
Fuck.
Was that the operation right after we lost Faustus?
Yep.
Oh,
that was the introduction of Firestarter.
Yeah, because that was the time skip. Yep.
Right.
Time
Yeah.
skip.
Yeah. I recall. Okay. God.
Yeah. So that segues nicely into another question we got for me specifically, which is kind of like tangents you go on, kind of red herrings you latch on to decide they're an important detail, et cetera, et cetera. The level of cocky you all were going through the fucking haunted the house one up in the Bennington Triangle one was just absolutely like, you all thought you had it figured. You thought you had all the cute clues. It was great. You were convinced it was that dude that was behind all of this. Like, you knew exactly what was going on. And I'm sitting there being like, you guys don't know the mechanic. You don't know what the fuck's going on. You don't know any of the lore. It's gonna kick your ass.
You've traumatized me from that, Charlie, because anytime you sap willpower, in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna fucking die if I lose all my willpower. We're done.
That was one of those ones where I'm looking at, I'm like, okay, so we're going? Okay. And I'm like, and all these 3 pages of notes, guess I don't need those, about like exactly how this shit works. You could have figured it out. Yeah, you went all on like the streamer aspect of that, and I'm like, this was supposed to be a set dressing thing, but I'm really glad we're having fun with it.
Look, I think that was probably one of the most monumental operations we had. Losing Faustus was crazy. But
That was, yeah.
and it was all like super poetic how it went out too, right? He broke his bond with his church, and that selfish act is what killed them.
Yeah, I think that was the perfect humbling campaign portion of the campaign, because we had made stuff work the first few, and it was fine, but this is the first time like that part of the campaign genuinely humbled the shit out of us, I think.
Yeah, no, I had a lot of fun running that, but like that one was fascinating where like you guys managed to latch on to every single wrong thing in that, not because it wasn't there to latch on to, but like you came to a bunch of conclusions about what was going on, and I'm like, really? Okay, fuck it. We ball. Like, cool, we're going.
I mean, that was the session, the operation that set Florence really into her ways of just being a hard ass about everything.
Yeah, I think that one and Prometheus Hawthorne's was there from the very beginning of that with the with NIMBY. The level of fear you all had and focus on protecting your necks.
I remember that.
Yeah, because it kept being like you all were walking around in like neck protectors and like whiplash braces and stuff like that, specifically to protect your necks. And I'm like, nothing suspicious about this. No, sir.
Well, to be fair, if I recall, Foxtrot got into a pretty close encounter with it anyway. So, like, I'm definitely protecting my neck. Like, I had a good reason to.
It was weird, but it ended up working, you know?
I think it was the fact it kept showing up. Like, the moment, like, 4 operations later when you found the box from the Cairo show, from Cairo Imports, immediately it was like, I need to put this, we need neck protection immediately. Like, screw all this neck protection right now.
Hey, we're not mugging with it again, man.
In a box of literal red herrings, you all were like, everyone got neck protection? Neck protection? Neck protection? Sure, there might be something cursed in here, but have you protected your neck yet? Yeah, it felt very Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Like, do you have your towel with you?
Yeah.
We just decided to take Wu-Tang's voice for the rest of the campaign.
Yep.
Ain't nothing to fuck with. Yeah, absolutely.
I actually have a couple from player to player questions.
Sure.
And whatnot. I'm going back to how I had something waiting for Alex and whatnot. One of the things that always impressed me, Alex, with your characters is just kind of how your characters have a very distinct voice. Not like physically, like you're giving a voice to your characters, but like they sound like they're coming from like a person and whatnot. Like, how do you connect to your characters and like creation and how you play your characters? I know that like John, your Delta Green one kind of like evolved over time just because that was our big campaign character, but it always seems as if you kind of know intuitively how your characters would react to everything.
So this was kind of a weird one for me, just because like when it comes to kind of like character creations, a lot of them genuinely are like a blank canvas. When I kind of get into it, like when we make new characters, like for Delta Green, for example, like I would imagine like it's almost a little bit stereotypical because I'll be like, okay, this guy's kind of a loner guy. He's going to be a little bit of like very gruff and this and that. But like, depending on kind of how the relationship formed with the characters, like I feel that he would evolve over time in terms of like, well, caring for his team, even though, again, it's his team and his personal life. He's very separate. But it's very much kind of what I feel as I start to like tell the backstory a bit for a character. And then after a few lines in conversation, I start to get a general vibe of where I want to go with it. But honestly, I wish I had like a solid explanation for it and like, you know, doing a bunch of research beforehand or this and that. But genuinely, it just kind of comes off of like when we're interacting. And then I feel like, yeah, I could, this feels natural, like for a response. And I just kind of go with it. And so I was gonna say, I wish I could say it was like all super planned out and like solid, but like honestly, a lot of it very much feels like I improv it a bit, and then depending on the vibe of the group, I kind of find my own dynamic, because one of the things I don't like to do is, like, if we're doing, like, we have a team composition, I don't like to duplicate or basically be another character that's already kind of similar there. So I always kind of just see what the vibe is at that point. So a lot of it is slightly stereotypical. Like a lab geek would be a little bit more like reserved. And so it's a little bit based off of that kind of like stereotype, if you will, in terms of like their job stuff. But as far as like kind of the character responses and all that, it becomes more of a kind of ebb and flow of how the group itself is vibing. Because like, just to give a good example, can't remember off the top of my head the name of the character who worked for the post office that got or no, I died while getting operated on. That
Snail.
one,
Snail.
That's right. I'm horrible with remembering some of the names sometimes, unless I have the stuff in front of me.
I remember all the names of characters I've killed.
But Snail was like, you know, I played more serious characters and more reserved one. I kind of wanted to throw the angle of someone who's a little bit more charismatic. And so they were kind of more carefree and charismatic and kind of just flowed that way. And then it felt like it worked for the dynamic of the group. Because that's the thing, is if I start to kind of go down a certain path for a character, if the dynamic doesn't feel well, I will kind of modify it slightly over time. So like Foxtrot very much went through that like dynamic where I evolved a little bit over time and built actual rapport with the team and whatnot. But yeah, I wish I had like a genuine formula, but honestly, it's just a lot of it is just vibes.
Which is kind of like, which is cool. I mean, I think it's just interesting how you have an archetype or stereotype or whatever, and it just kind of evolves naturally through interactions. Because the kind of other thing that I wanted to ask was like with Dylan, it's kind of funny how you were talking about like your focus and stuff. And honestly, I think like you have some of the strongest like laser focus when it comes to playing. It's insanely impressive, and like games that you have familiarity with, you have like a very comfortable movement through like these spaces. It's like you have like mastery over what that is. Do you prepare mentally, or like how do you mentally prepare yourself like when getting into a game, or kind of how do you achieve that kind of focus with these characters that you're playing, or just how you play? Because it seems as if you are, how do I say this? How do you kind of get into that? Like, oh, there it is. You're consistent. You're consistent, like not saying that your characters don't evolve or anything else like that, but I've noticed that like when you play, you have like this insane, just kind of like, I know who my character is from the get-go.
So I don't really do anything to prepare. A lot of what I do when I'm making a character that I guess kind of works out to helping me find like how I'm going to play them and their like personality and drives and whatnot is I get really into the backstory aspect of everything, which I'm sure Charlie is well aware of, because I wrote a pretty long backstory for Florence. But I tend to build so other GMs I've spoken with, the way that I like write backstories and characters isn't normal, I guess. Like I don't write like a history or anything like that. I usually do like a series of like short stories about a character's life and like difficult points in their life that have shaped them to be how they are.
That's really fucking cool, actually.
That is actually really fucking cool.
Yeah, and part of the reason I do it is because I can't, maybe I have some form of ADHD, I don't know, but I can't focus enough to just write like a history that isn't involved with like the character interacting in my mind. So I have these series of like short stories, and then from there I can build like a little timeline that I have usually where I'll date out their life where certain events happened that I either wrote about or didn't write about. So when I start playing characters, I tend to already have an idea of why they are the way they are and the events in the past that have shaped them to be like that. So, like with one of the characters I'm playing, one of the issues that they have is they don't like guns. because they've experienced gun violence in the past, and it causes them to fury frenzy when they see them all the time. They get irrationally afraid of them, like, when they show up. So it's been a reoccurring problem, and I get really angry when the party wants to bring guns into any situation. That's a really like weird sort of example, but I have like a spring off point already when I have most characters made because I wrote out a backstory like that. It's a little different for like SL because we didn't really write a backstory. I just kind of thought, going into playing Star, for example, I was like, okay, he's a cop. He works for a weird sort of police agency. He's going to be a little arrogant. He's kind of dumb. I mean, he loves his family, but he loves his job too. And he's not a cop because he wants to help people, even if he says he does. He's a cop because he wants to be a badass who, saves the day. Which is sort of why I played up the ridiculous scene of him pulling up in the Jeep with like the sheriff's hat on and the chainsaw back in Over in the Ice. So it's just kind of for SL, it's kind of thinking like, what is sort of an archetype that would fit into this, and then turn it on its head a little bit. He's not a guy that wants to help people. He wants to be a badass in his own mind. I don't really have. I'll be honest. The last operation we did, the character that I was playing, I kind of struggled figuring out like what kind of personality I was going to go with. So I just went with like no nonsense because it's really comfortable for me to play. But yeah, that's sort of like the way that I do it. If I'm going to have a character for a long time, I write a pretty extensive backstory. If it's a character that I'm going to have for a couple of sessions, I don't really do that. I just kind of build a very like a little profile of what they might be like, kind of shape them.
Building off that in a weird way, we got a question of what do you and the players consider an ideal Delta Green camp? I think we'll probably all have different answers to this.
I can go first. I was just talking. I think the ideal Delta Green campaign for me is one that is it feels like everything's connected. I mean, because everything has to be. But the big thing for me is in the end, the players have a good idea of what's going on. They still feel like they're overcoming this insurmountable task, and ideally, there's a huge risk that there's going to be a TPK, and if they don't TPK, the party feels worse off after it. At least, like, characters feel like they're worse off. Maybe they achieved their goal, but they're maimed or they're mentally broken, or they lost someone close, and it's all for the greater narrative that Delta Green is an organization full of very competent people who are trading their bodies, their bond, their life for just to push a minute back on the clock before the end of the world. That's what I really like. I like seeing characters go in, get beaten down and broken, and then at the end of all of it, feeling broken and kind of having to go on with Delta Green anyways, because you can't leave after that point. Might become a handler, but you're in it. This is your life now.
I would second that. I do like when we have moments in the campaign, regardless of where the storyline goes, moments in the campaign where, when things are going too good, there's something that humbles you along the way. And like, you remember like, hey, no, there are real lives at risk here. Like in terms of the story and character, you make bad decisions, it can cost you greatly. So like just to kind of like point out, I guess briefly on here, like the situation with Faust, lost him to the house. That was a huge turning point for the character. Because previously we hadn't had any kind of actual player death. We've had injuries, but like nothing as far as deaths in that campaign. And then of course at the end of when you have the moment where you fail an athletics check and sudden you don't catch the hand of your partner, they fall into an abyss. That stuff is also, it's to remind you that like, yeah, you have these superhuman feats sometimes where like some really great rolls happen, but something will come along and remind you that like you have lives at stake here. And I think dancing that balance is what makes a really great Delta Green campaign.
For myself, I think a phenomenal Delta Green campaign kind of puts you in a position where you make some really wild choices. Not in the sense of just like, oh, let's just be murder hobos or anything else like that. But I'm specifically thinking about in the Century Club, kind of the turning point for where I decided to take Father Faustus and actively try to start making him a wizard was when him as a man of faith was at the throes of death, calling upon his God who did not answer after feeling the sting of a bunch of cultists like actively drawing power from a god that responds to him or responds to them. And I think from that point, it's when I kind of fell in love with the game, specifically for these moments of revelation that the consequences don't just peak at death. Like past death, there is an impact to how your actions impact others and impact the world around you. So whether it be these giant monsters that have lingering after effects where we're continuing to monitor any kind of developments, like I'm personally hoping that the faulty report made about the monster in Lover in the Ice comes back and surfaces back up, where we have like this shitty information on whether or not a team gets massacred or a team is slowed down or whatever the hell, or just even like the kind of continuing arcs of just how Pine was like taken down, and you have like these characters from different places suddenly kind of converging. For example, the fact that there was just a weird history between Florence and Firestarter that caused her anxiety because she just watched like somebody who's green die, and then this person who she saw like the first Delta Green operation popped back up and is now back in her life as somebody that she's in charge of. It is to something that challenges the player to look at their character and how their character is not just going to survive, but cope.
I like that one.
See how those choices and how they act from there on out work with the world around them. Did that make sense?
Yeah, it did. Actually, it's interesting because you and I think along similar things, but in different ways. So it's the ideal Delta Green operation for me is all about escalation. And I think like operation, campaign, whatever, I think this applies to tabletop RPGs for me in general. It's back down. I always kind of want, this is going to sound kind of trite, but like, I always want things to be getting worse. I always want kind of the situation, or at least some part of the situation, to be getting worse. I'm not saying you can't have moments where like you slip back down to kind of comfort, but like using Hawthorne Crusades kind of escalation as an example, you have the NIMBY incident. It's like, okay, we got these bugs, someone's doing something suspicious with it. You then have it bump up to like, hey, we have this cannibal cult doing a thing that's actually not really part of what the fuck's going on, but like maybe we got aimed at it. Like they went up on our radar because of that, and that's weird. And the escalation there is someone's aware enough of Delta Green that like they're manipulating Delta Green and either sending you after targets or using it as a vetting process or something. Who the fuck knows? And then you have an active attack on, and they're pretty sure they got the TPK and they didn't. So you kind of have that cooling off period where we had Weirdwood, where it's like, yeah, it's the stakes aren't reset, but they're kind of in this lull period, but also like, hey, the thing shows up again. Like the ongoing kind of weird presence makes itself known and like hints at you're not the only thing that's keeping an eye on. It then takes the story from, okay, you have this antagonist working against you, to you have an antagonist working against kind of your entire operation at that point. It's like, it doesn't give a rat's ass about it. It has grander schemes or something, just a cog. And you're kind of having shadow thing fight shadow thing. And you're realizing that like you were never the goal. And I'm probably not making a lot of sense, but like the situation has grown beyond you. Like you are the kind of catalyst and kind of the viewport of how people are viewing the situation, but like you're not the main point of what's going on. You are your own main point, but like the escalation's now exceeded beyond you, and that's kind of what separates. That's what makes Delta Green to me in some ways, where like you're dealing with a situation or a thing or a concept or like whatever that has, it's not that it escaped you, but you're now kind of finally far enough back that you can realize just how big what was going on always was. And that like it kind of doubles down on the Delta Green kind of spiral where it's like, no, you're going crazy, you're burning bonds, you're physically pushing yourself to the limits. And for what? You were never important in the grand scheme of things. You were just the thing at the time that needed to happen, if that makes any sense. And I think kind of the idea of Delta Green campaign for me is one where like at the end, maybe you did the thing, maybe you didn't, maybe you're unsure if you did the thing, but you did a thing still, and that's all you can do, or you did a thing. Is that even gonna matter in the grand scheme of things? Like it's kind of like what Dylan said, like you find yourself looking at it going, I don't like I know what happened, but like I can never explain what the fuck just happened thing. Like I lack the words to explain what I am looking at and kind of what I've experienced, but like, yeah, we did that and we had to do that, and I don't know what we just did. Did that make any sense at all?
Yeah, I think it makes.
That's where, because I also think there's no ideal Delta Green campaign. Like I just enjoy kind of, I obviously like variety. All of our Delta Green stuff's a little bit different from Delta Green stuff, or from our other Delta Green stuff by design. So it's kind of the, I'm going to take what I just said back. My ideal Delta Green campaign is agents in a new situation I've not seen agents have to play through yet. I like new. I like kind of seeing what agents will do next and kind of like A, what I can come up with, but also B, like, where's this going to go? I'm always curious where our Delta Green ops are going to go in the grand scheme of things. It's always a lot of fun when I set my dominoes up and see how people knock them down. To kind of transfer to another topic, kind of the essentials of horror. So I'm not sure how to phrase this question. The essential of horror is transgressive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So within the constraints of rule-based settings with director's play, how can one truly horrify?
I think a lot of, just kind of gathering from what you read, I think a lot of people misconstrue like being scared or being startled or like that kind of fear with horror. For horror, for me, is the sense of anxiety where I become disconnected. Like there's like a separation of like my mind body presence or mind body connection, and where all of a sudden I have two root sensations attempting to fight against itself and trying to direct me into what I'm trying to do. To create a horror campaign and to create a horror narrative, and the way that Charlie kind of creates these specific aspects, like I now have an anxiety when I'm in a haunted house that is slowly sapping away my willpower. And so I am now caught in a tumult where I don't know what to do. And every single choice and every single thing that I can do, I am anxious or I am nervous to approach because that might bring me harm. To kind of create a great horror is to, I feel, be caught up in a situation where there is not just like the mind body disconnect from the player, but like a complete breakdown of player cohesion, in that you now have an entire group that's like attempting to solve this problem or run away from this problem, that just kind of escalates their anxiety, where it's like this, it's just like a fucking tornado. Like, I think that's how my initial response and reaction to just kind of what I heard as you were reading.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like my answer to this, because I think like I have two answers for this, I think. And one of them is, so using our infamous kind of house as an example. That house is built upon a deep understanding of the Delta Green rules front and center. It's the idea that like, so it's actually built on a deep understanding of kind of how people metagame Delta Green with some frequency. Right? They have dump stats, like, despite not being a game that kind of matters in that kind of, there's totally dump stats, there's totally kind of things people ignore. And that was kind of my twist, whatever you want to call it, attempt at like, okay, here's a set of very established, very ingrained in every player mechanics. And one of those mechanics is the fact that your willpower points don't fucking matter that much. Like the majority of the time, they're just the points you trade off to shave off sanity. So like if you truly understand Delta Green like a mechanics level, they are a third health bar, kind of. Like if you run out of willpower, you, depending on the circumstance, basically pass out or whatever type of thing. Lose your ability to function until you've recovered type of thing. And I don't know of lots of times where people have thought to go after the willpower points specifically because on a lot of characters, they are a surprising weak point because you're not paying attention to them. Like there's a whole mechanic for replenishing them. There's a whole mechanic for other ways to utilize them that you just don't use because you don't need to do it all that often type of case. It comes from a kind of deep, very specific understanding of Delta Green players and Delta Green specifically, where it's like, hey, I'm doing nothing outside of the rules. There's no bending going on even right now. It is just that, like, if this one thing happens in this circumstance, it's really bad. And you would have no reason to think it might be really bad unless you've done a bunch of research, which didn't happen at that point. So kind of like it became a jump scare in itself where it's like, hey, this happened. Matter of fact, it happened. It's like, that's not how this ever worked before. Like, I think that kind of goes back to the, how do you transgress and make it kind of subjective and kind of like the surprise aspect of it. I think kind of within a rule-based system, there is real power and real horror that you specifically as a GM can derive really understanding a game and like understanding kind of like it at a mechanical level under the hood, like what's actually ticking away. And then using that knowledge to kind of like analyze your players and analyze kind of the general meta around the game where it's like, okay, cool. Here's a thing no one ever cares about. Let's make them care about it in a major way all of a sudden. It never goes over well, but like survival mechanics and tabletop RPGs in general, when suddenly you have a group that's never had to deal with survival mechanics, suddenly forced to deal with survival mechanics on an extended period. Not even necessarily brutal ones, but like it's just an annoyance. It's there, and like it gets in your players' heads because they have to use this thing they've never had to use before. Maybe like in the 100 sessions they play under you and other GMs or DMs or whatever, they suddenly have this mechanic that's always been there. It's always been spelled out for them. They know exactly how to replay it because it's written out for them. And they're now being forced to use something that they just don't understand because no one ever uses it. If that makes any kind of sense to that. And I guess kind of my other answer for that is I hate jump scares. I think they are lazy. I think they are kind of anyone can do a jump scare and they're not horror. They're just jump scares. They are leaping out at someone and going boo and relying on the human kind of reaction to something jumping out at them to get kind of a reaction out of it. I don't think that actually works in tabletop RPGs because like unless you're actively yelling at your players, jump scares don't really work. Don't get me wrong, you can have like surprises happen and that works, but like if you're relying on kind of how modern horror movies do horror, that doesn't work. You have to have kind of a slow atmospheric build and plot and kind of like you start off with minor things that are upsetting or kind of this transgressive stuff. Like I tend to do a lot with kind of body horror or kind of like violation of spaces and stuff like that because that's the stuff I personally find either kind of like easy to describe or most kind of mentally upsetting. And I pull some from just growing up and having weird stuff happen and stuff like that. Like a lot of how I describe wrong spaces comes from the fact that when I was younger, I came home from a trip and someone had broken into my place, and that's a very specific feeling that you can't really explain to someone until they've also gone through something similar. And like that wrongness, I think, kind of makes kind of tabletop RPG horror a lot easier because like it's not human to feel uncomfortable in just a space that like nothing bad has happened to you in and kind of a larger spectrum type of thing. And I think it's kind of like just like it's not so about transgressing. It's more about finding the right way of twisting a situation to kind of make it horrific, if that makes any sense. Like horror is different from person to person, but there's some kind of base human stuff that gets in our brain, gets all wiggly and uncomfortable for us. And it's all about kind of finding the way you can kind of press the buttons that make the wiggles happen. And I think kind of it's about kind of the slow build. It's about the kind of the slow bleed, the escalation, the kind of added details of things where it's like, yeah, a dead body by itself is not horrifying. Having your players walk over, investigate the dead body, it's like, okay, cool, it's a dead body. Here's the basic symptoms of it. They're all cops or something equivalent. You've seen a dead body before. This is not horrifying. It's the fact that, like, when you get a closer look, all its bones are pink or something like that. Not blood pink, but like metallic pink or something. I don't know. Like, it's about taking a situation that's kind of, in theory, like generically horrible, and then like finding a detail that kind of makes it like, okay, that's the pop, if that makes any sense. And kind of like, that's your transgression at that point. It's not so much about kind of making everything overkill. It's about making the details that matter stand out, as opposed to just kind of like, rah, I got you.
Yeah, I'll get to what I think about horror, but I wanted to comment that I think it's funny that for the house, you were trying to basically flip the mechanic on like what was important. So willpower over health.
Yeah.
And it's weird because I know that it's not like the right move, but I have always specifically valued willpower much more than health in Delta Green, which I'm sure makes sense from the characters I've made. You can tell.
Dylan play a high willpower character? Never.
I can be calm in every situation. But another thing about like horror, I think so far everybody's agreed, is that it's not necessarily being scared, but more about the anxiety. When you're playing a role-playing game, you're trying to step into a person's shoes. So, I mean, if I were, in the sewers and I heard buzzing from these huge mosquito-like things that I know can bore into your neck and kill you, if I was down there, I'd be scared. And that would be horrifying for me. So when I'm looking at it in like a character's lens and trying to really get into the mindset, I mean, I feel nervous because the character doesn't want to die, so I don't want my character to die either. So I have the anxiety that they're going to die, or, you get the anxiety from a revelation about something. Like when we found out that Miss Pine was dead. That was crazy. That gave me anxiety, and it came out of nowhere. It's not like a horror movie because, you're playing a game and you're rolling dice, but the dice help inform the story and the horror because it adds to the anxiety. You don't know if you're going to succeed this role that you need to make to get out of this dubious situation. And sometimes you won't. And you're either dead or you're in a worse situation.
I think some of the things in regards to horror, especially just like as a writer or anything else like that, my sense of horror is knowing details that you don't want to hear, from kind of how a specific thing is just moving unnaturally. You can change something from like, and the such and such is creeping towards you, or you can say the such and such takes a step and you notice that its joints are loudly popping and snapping every single time that it moves. It bends in unnatural ways and yada yada yada. Its nails are like scratching up against like the whatever the hell. I think kind of creating that atmosphere will really help kind of have that, especially in a tabletop setting, only because this is now you are feeding into a player's imagination and having to basically hypnotize them into experiencing what you want them to experience. I like my shit kind of like explicit and wordy and whatever the heck, just because then I just now have more things to understand about the ununderstandable.
That makes sense.
Pointing things that I do not understand and therefore should fear it.
I think that's mostly for the tabletop RPG stuff. I think we kind of covered all of them. Apologies if we missed something. We'll get it on the next time we do something like this. Let's do a couple kind of quick, more off-topic ones. What other podcast media do y'all enjoy?
I listen to actual plays as well as like learning stuff. Listen to experts talk about things.
I guess other media too, like I think beyond just podcasts. If you have other stuff you want to talk about,
just like what kind of media in general that
the
I.
The question is, what other podcasts / media do?
Yeah, so podcasts, books. I mean, I watch movies, but they're not the pinnacle of my interest. But really, recently, it's been podcasts and books for me. If you haven't read The Expanse, I highly recommend it.
I listen to a lot of political podcasts. Actually, that's kind of what I mainly absorb when I am listening to podcasts. Um, or I listen to stuff by Serial Productions, which is mainly like, well, they did this story about like the murder stuff, but then they also did some really cool stuff in terms of like a school system a while back and the legal system in, I think it was like in a small town in Chicago, or small town near Chicago and stuff like that. So it's a lot of like nonfiction, I guess, is what I mainly listen to outside of, the like our podcast, like which I'll listen to every once in a while. Just sometimes I can't stand the sound of my voice, so I don't. But yeah, mainly political podcasts or just mainly nonfiction stuff. So
my top 3 podcasts outside of Negative Modifier is Cerebro. That is the X-Men podcast that I have just brain rot to and just replaced a lot of vital information with X-Men facts and X-Men just lore. But it's not just kind of like an info dump. It's actually a really interesting way, or interesting kind of aspect in where you do have a not homonormative, but like a queer worldview or queer worldview kind of lens to look at X-Men storylines and specific X-Men characters and how they're interacting. I mean, like with the fact that Chris Claremont wrote such a huge portion of it, and that man just will find a way to give a woman a chain smoking habit and a gun, as well as throw in some sort of BDSM scene. Like that's within, or BDSM where that's like some sort of thing to study. Second, it was Pick Me Up, I'm Scared. It's kind of like a non-fiction podcast that kind of touches upon topics like American history topics, American propaganda topics. But it's like girly talked through. It's fucking phenomenal. And then one of my favorites that I've finally been catching up on is Old Gods of Appalachia. I love Southern Gothic. It is something that I find absolutely nuts. I think that the Appalachian mountain range is one of the most terrifying things in the entirety of the world, only because the series of tunnels that runs underneath it are older than evolved bones. Like you will not find animal remains or anything else like that because those existed before animals evolved. The concept of something being so ancient and so old is mortifying to me, because you would think that those mountain ranges would be so gigantic or whatever the heck. No, those are the fucking, that's the corpse of a mountain range. That is a corpse of a mountain range that is scattered across the world, where the tip of that is now the fucking Scottish Highlands. Wild. Fucking wild. Otherwise, I consume so much audiobooks only because I found out that listening to audiobooks at a one-time speed is like trying to listen to paint dry, I guess. I listen to media at minimum two times speed if I want to catch details, but otherwise I'm listening to stuff at like 2.75 or 3, just because that's just how my brain processes spoken word.
I can't listen to podcasts anymore because I work on a podcast, not from my podcast is better standpoint, but I pick up on audio issues they're having, and it drives me crazy slowly. That's not totally fair. There's a bunch of podcasts I can still listen to. I go through phases. I used to be a huge true crime fan, but I've kind of slowly drifted away from that, and that was a large percentage of the podcast I used to like a lot. I do enjoy nerds nerding out about stuff that they are uniquely super knowledgeable about, but I don't know. Like podcasts I like have a tendency to where it's like, okay, there's a lot of overlap between them because it's like it's a bunch of topics I've already heard like 4 or 5 people's takes on, and I'm like, what are you gonna bring to the history of MK Ultra I haven't heard before? Nothing. Okay, cool. I also read the book on the people that you're referencing and stuff like that. So I've drifted away from that, and kind of I'm also an avid audiobook reader. I try to do a cycle of kind of 3 fun books and then 1 air quotation serious book, typically something nonfiction or kind of just educational, but really typically just a history of something or more more kind of in depth or in detail dive on something that I might find useful. I really fucking love garbage media, if I'm being honest. Not media about garbage, but like I am a huge fan of so bad it's good shit, and I was a huge B movie fan until B movies got weird and people were intentionally making B movies, and that made me sad because that was the charm got lost for that. I don't know, like, so I spend a weird amount of time kind of delving into the depths of YouTube, finding stuff that, like, I'm never gonna watch this fucking channel ever again, but I will fucking binge watch some dude who's like spray painting himself silver to explain to you how fucking TikTok, all these like viral TikTok reels are fake, and here's how the video editing tricks dude used to make them, and then I move the fuck on and never watch that stuff again. But I'm like, cool, that's how you made these super viral things that people were like, oh my god, it's fucking magic or whatever. I don't know. I bounce around. I have a lot of topics I find interesting, but then I get bored of them pretty quick, so I kind of move around from them. Anything slightly eldritch will probably get me to watch. I really enjoy shows that are simultaneously enjoy and hate shows that are like, are we supernatural or are we not? We'll never fully commit to it. So the True Detective series, which is always like, is there something supernatural going on? Maybe stuff like that, where like there's a supernatural element that maybe they acknowledge or maybe they don't, or people are just like, yep, guess it was a werewolf. You want to talk about that? No. A lot of urban fantasy stuff. I bounce around a lot. I've recently gotten back into video games after losing my ability to play video games for about 5 years, and that's been weird. Didn't find anything that interested me for a while, and now I'm playing way too goddamn much Factoria and Darktide. All right. I think it's going to be our last but not least question on this one, or definitely least, because in the old podcast, me and Alex used to talk about food like crazy people. Not like not food like crazy people, but like talking about food because we are crazy people in the most unhinged way possible. We have a request for what our favorite drinks are, both alcoholic and non-alcoholic, especially if we use them to unwind after a podcast. And we've been asked for an example of our hottest take on food. And Alex, I'm going to ask you not to reference any of our greatest hits. So no talk of ravioli, no talk of Pop-Tarts, no talk of any of that shit. That I don't remember what my fucking stance on that stuff was, but I'm sure you're still angry at me for some of it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'd wake up and there was a message that you sent me about something and it changes the perspective I have on a particular food item. Yeah, no, that was a thing. But I have new takes. Don't worry.
So who wants to start this one off?
Can you go over the question and I'll just answer them as the questions come?
Favorite drinks, alcoholic and non-alcoholic. Specifically, if you used to kind of cope with especially rousing or harrowing podcast session. Either harrowing or hilarious, I suppose.
Okay. My favorite overall drink is, and this is going to sound wild, but it's water. I'm pretty bland. I like water a lot. I think it tastes good. I don't actually ever really drink to unwind from podcasts. So I just don't really drink in general. But if I had to have a favorite alcoholic beverage, it would probably be a whiskey sour.
And what is your hottest food take?
Hands down, the best food like ever is just straight up bread.
Ooh, that's a good take. I like that.
Coming out swinging. Okay.
I'll die on that fucking hill.
Now you're getting it. Dare to be wrong on this one. Like just bread in general or a specific type of bread?
Just bread in general. I love all sorts of bread, man. If it was nutritional, I could survive solely off of bread.
So, favorite alcoholic drink, craft cocktail, specifically invented at the Shady Lady Saloon in Sacramento. It's called a white linen. It is 1.5 ounces of gin, preferably Hendrick's, 1 ounce lemonade, 1/2 ounce simple syrup, 1/2 ounce Saint Germain elderflower liqueur, and 3 cucumber slices, plus more for garnish, and soda water. It is one of the most divine drinks I've had. Absolutely phenomenal. My go-to, though, is legitimately just Maker's Mark neat. Sometimes I'll throw in just like a touch of ice water just to kind of open up that bouquet. I am that weirdo who will talk about bouquets of whiskeys and everything else like that. Favorite non-alcoholic drink is lemonade. That was originally what I was going to get tattooed across my knuckles. I made that decision in junior year of high school in 2000. Actually, I'm not even going to mention what my junior year of high school is because I'm I feel like I'm going to make people feel old. I've been criticized about this a lot. But unfortunately, Jay-Z keeps fucking up, and that was the biggest fuck up, but it ended up being great in the end because it gave us the fucking Lemonade album. But that's Beyonce's word now, so I couldn't get Lemonade tattooed across my hands. Initially, I was like, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade, and that's what like my fucking fists were, and I would just beat the shit out of people, but that's Beyonce's word now. Hottest food take is Italian food is straight up mid. Should not be expensive or anything else like that. I understand that there is a specific craft in creating pasta, and there's all these like different aspects of it. I've had handmade pasta. I've had really phenomenal pasta, but raviolis mid, fucking handmade spaghetti mid, gnocchi best pasta. It's still just potato dumplings. Like you can't fucking like if you're gonna be like, oh, we're gonna go to an Italian fancy Italian restaurant, like do better for yourself. Find better food.
That one. So okay, that's a good take.
You said a hot take. This is my strongest opinion about food. You know the fact that like all I do is watch wrestling and fucking food like and food cooking shit. So like
changing my food take. People that watch wrestling can't talk about anything ever, have opinions. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Ska and pro wrestling are the purest art forms that America has.
Oh God, just invalidating all your points you've ever made with that sentence. Alex, I'll let you close this one out, so I'll go next on this one.
Okay.
I feel as though you're like bubbling on something right now. I feel like this could go real weird for you. But so I make mead because I like mead a lot. It's kind of fucking a pain in the ass to find mead. So yeah, I homebrew mead, which is probably why it's my favorite alcoholic beverage. But I like that and something called Applejack, which is basically whiskey made with hard cider that you then distill, or my preference is frost distilling it, so it just tastes aggressively apple and alcoholic by the end of that. It's not easy to find by any measure, but it's really goddamn good if you can. For non-alcoholic, I also am a huge fan of lemonade, but only the way I make it, which is with maple syrup instead of sugar, because I grew up in the woods and we do weird things there. I'm also a insane tea drinker. Left to my own devices, I will drink at least a gallon, if not more, of like green tea or red tea or something a day more. It's a whole weird thing. I really like hot tea. And on the kind of unwinding from sessions topic, I don't do that much when we finish something. I typically do a little victory drink, and I have either my Applejack Reserve or special whiskey that I've bought over the years for that kind of thing, because it's over. Celebrate the fact something's been kind of brought to an end and stories concluded or something like that. But yeah, it doesn't happen a ton. Mostly because I try not to drink alone in the dark after we've done recording and whatnot. But my food take is that people don't actually like coffee, and they should just take sugar pills and caffeine pills and get it the fuck over with and stop making coffee so expensive for the rest of us. You don't like coffee, you want sugar and caffeine, and that's fine, but don't act like you like drinking it. Those of us that actually like coffee want you all to fuck off.
All these takes have been great.
I'm going to get so much hate.
I just went after coffee drinkers. I feel like I've got shot at a larger target than you. Anyone looking at a Starbucks right now is like, this motherfucker.
Right? I imagine that line plays through when they they're sitting in the drive-through of a Starbucks and all of a sudden that comes out.
I'll double down. If you think Starbucks coffee is good, your taste buds are broken.
I hard agree.
I also hard agree. Starbucks coffee is awful. You shouldn't like it.
Dunkin' Donuts coffee is like licking dirty ass, dude.
Oh, yeah,
Dunkin' Donuts is also not that great.
That is why I have the opinion I have. I grew up in the land of Dunkin' Donuts where we've invented extra extra. Proof people don't like coffee and just want sugar and caffeine. Like, extra extra is a crime against food.
This is going to be a little bit more local. Dutch Brothers ain't shit. It's just more sugar and everything else like that.
Again,
that one hits a little bit because I love Dutch Bros.
Me too.
You don't like coffee, you like caffeine and sugar.
Well, to be fair, I do get their energy drinks from Dutch Bros. I don't do the actual coffee parts.
My point, like, Just drink Monster Zero Cal, most of you. Just get it over with.
Listen, I enjoy like a light roast with nothing in the morning.
Then you may actually enjoy coffee, unlike most people I know that have to load it up with a fuck ton of shit.
Yeah, like when my dad makes himself coffee, he puts in 9 sugars and 9 creams, and I'm like, dude, you're not even drinking coffee anymore.
If I drink coffee, that's what I have to do.
Oh.
I'm not a coffee drinker. I'm not. I don't. But yeah.
Art school taught me to drink my coffee black. I can't drink hot coffee though. I am not. I am too gay to drink hot coffee. It has to be iced. I am cold brews. Like the prevalence of cold brews is a fucking wonder.
I'm also team cold brew. I don't do hot coffee. Never been a fan of it. Never will be.
I like cold brew coffee in the afternoon, but I really want my coffee to be hot.
All right, Alex, let's hear what you got.
All right. Favorite drinks, alcoholic. If I'm doing like an actual mixed drink, I am a huge fan of a Tom Collins. Just the right amount of like citrusiness, a little bit of alcohol. It's really nice. It's an easy drink. Most places make it just fine. Not a huge deal, but that's my alcoholic drink of choice if I go to like a nice, place that has mixed drinks and all that stuff. Otherwise, I am that guy. I like IPAs. I enjoy them. I like the variety and some of the flavors that IPAs take, but I am an overall beer enjoyer when I drink. I don't actually drink that often anymore. I'm pretty much relatively kind of just don't really do alcohol much anymore. I don't partake in anything else of that nature. It's just I'm not really into that, I guess, now as I got older. Younger me drank straight Everclear out of a bottle. I don't do that anymore. So, yeah.
It's a young man's alcohol.
That is a young man's alcohol, and I went 3/4 of a bottle of Everclear by myself in one night.
Jesus.
That was the first time I ever blacked out. And I think that's maybe like the first and only time I ever blacked out. Like legit, like don't remember parts of the night. Again, that was a younger time. Favorite non-alcoholic drink? I am also a huge fan of lemonade, but if I had to choose between lemonade and this other drink, I would go with this other drink. And it's particularly sugary flavored iced teas. And very particularly, I love a good raspberry iced tea. I love a really good like mango iced tea. But those are what I enjoy. I do love the combination and going with a, what's it called? Arnold Palmer. And the mix, I will do Arnold Palmer's from time to time. I enjoy the mix of both. So that'll be my non-alcoholic drink. My hottest food take, and then maybe it's because it's generally how I feel about it, but all seafood is ass. Seafood is disgusting. It is not good. I don't care how nice you make a salmon. It will never compete with a good chicken breast. It will never compete with a good steak. All seafood is trash.
Damn, that's a crazy one.
And I'm sorry, it's just people talk about like, oh no, eating bugs. Like, yeah, that's crazy. You eat sea bugs. What the fuck are you talking about? I'm sorry. I don't know.
Well, I can agree with you on the sea bug part, but I do love me fish.
I'm not. This is particularly fueled by like, I have a bad reaction with eating fish, but I have been able to eat other fish in the past. There is not one land animal that doesn't taste better than seafood, hands down. I will eat rattlesnake, rabbit, which I have in the past. Any steak is better than any of the best seafood you can prep out there. A mid steak is better than most seafood, hands down.
Do you consider turtle a seafood?
Is it a sea turtle?
No, soft-shelled turtles are a freshwater turtle.
Then no.
Yeah. Which leads me to my kind of adjacent part to it. Sushi is overrated.
Well, that's a given your stance on seafood. But
yeah, but like seafood's one thing, but like sushi itself, overpriced and overrated. I'm sorry. You're just paying full price meal for appetizer servings. Sorry.
I can understand that one.
I feel feel like I've just ostracized a lot of the podcast group by going after seafood as hard as I did.
I don't know. I like seafood.
Yeah, I used to work at a sushi restaurant, so I have a particular soft spot for seafood and sushi.
I will say Alex is like, of the various people I've known that, quote, don't like seafood, I think Alex is the only person I know that can, like, honestly say without a shadow of a doubt he does not like it for the taste.
Yeah, I don't at all. It's just none of the seafood has ever done it for me. I've eaten tuna in the past. I've eaten salmon. I've eaten calamari as well. Like, just anytime you introduce seafood like somewhere, it completely throws off the vibe as far as I'm concerned. And I would reinforce that with the fact that if you microwave fish at the office, everyone fucking hates you.
That's not a hot take. That's just being an asshole.
No, but that's also just links into the whole like seafood thing. You like seafood, you wouldn't mind the smell of it being microwaved. But anyway, that's a separate. But still, yes, that is my take. I have one fast food take in particular that might set off a lot of people, but I don't know if the world's ready for this hot take.
Is it that In-N-Out is mid?
No, I like In-N-Out because the thing is, people always compare In-N-Out to like Whataburger and all these other ones. The thing is, In-N-Out is not for that audience because In-N-Out is a relatively cheap burger for a good price point for what you're paying for it.
Honestly. Not anymore, it's not.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, but
not gonna lie.
The time being the 90s.
No, it was a pretty good price point for like what you get there.
It was a solid price point for for a decent burger and whatnot. As a Southern Californian and that being able to eat Whataburger for the first time like over a decade ago, I would kill to have a Whataburger. I think Whataburger fries are absolutely fucking phenomenal. The fact that it's 24 hours, fucking phenomenal. But I'm also a Tommy Burger Southern Californian, not an In-N-Out Southern Californian. So like my views are a little different.
Yeah. See, Fat Burger is good quality, decent quality for a really good price. Because Fat Burger gives you a lot of fucking burger.
I know that Fat Burger is like an LA like darling. I don't care for Fat Burger. Unfortunately.
That's fair.
Let's hear this fast food hot take. I'm curious now, so we can close this out with your just being fucking wrong about something culinary.
Del Taco is better than Taco Bell.
Yep, that's right.
Yes,
you speak truth.
I mean, both are garbage, so it's kind of like two rats fighting over shit. So,
Baja Blast is memeified, and it is slightly tasty. Or it is absolutely tasty. I'm not gonna lie about that. But at the same time, like if I were to fucking go and have a non-Mexican Mexican meal, I'm gonna go to fucking Del Taco.
If I'm judging, like if I'm going somewhere for like food, I'm not gonna judge their quality on the drink they can give me, to be honest. I mean, I love Baja Blast, but like I don't think that can go into the factor of the.
You can buy a Baja Blast at the fucking grocery store now. Like that is no longer an exclusive, and therefore Taco Bell has lost power.
I admit to being team close them both down. I'm just kind of shocked given the fact that I know at least 3 people on this podcast entered into the contest to win the fucking Baja Blast hot sauce they were making at one point.
Listen.
Memeified.
Again, it's a meme.
Yeah, to be fair, I'll give it to him. Baja Blast is good, but I haven't drank soda in over a year, so like I can't. Like, what's the point of Taco Bell anymore?
What was ever the point of Taco Bell?
Baja Blast.
And don't get me wrong, I still eat Taco Bell from time to time. If I had a choice, Del Taco wins out every time. Their vegetarian menu is better. Their just standard beef compared to Taco Bell's is way better. And also the price point now for Del Taco is relatively good, if not better than where Taco Bell has gone with some of their stuff. So, yes.
I find this conversation fascinating because I'm team. If those were the only options, I just wouldn't fucking eat. I'd be like, no, fucking starvation is better than either of these.
This is probably true, to be honest.
One thing I will concede, though, is that the Taco Bell merch or whoever is working Taco Bell branding and merch is fucking solid because Taco Bell is like the Taco Bell shop has like good shit on it. If you look at Del Taco's web store, it looks like
Yeah, but the sentence you just said is, this restaurant's shirts are real good, therefore I like it. Nothing about their food.
No, because their food isn't great. I'm just saying that their branding and their merchandising is like, with just that alone, I understand why Taco Bell just has the notoriety it has. But in comparison, when you look at the Del Taco web store, it looks like a fucking Redbubble shop. It's embarrassing. It's fucking embarrassing.
No,
Arizona Iced Tea has a very similar fancy shop for the stuff they sell too. So just some of these brands just have good meme marketing, and yeah, I don't know, but yeah, Baja Blast is definitely memeified. I have a crazy soda take that fuck it. Do you mind if I share my crazy soda take?
Let's close on your hot soda take.
Coke Zero is better than regular Coke.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I don't like Coke, so I don't have
I'm with Dylan on this one. I would just rather not drink anything if I had to drink Coke of any type. Like, instead of an empty glass of nothing, I'd rather that. All right, now that we've completely undercut our credibility on any topic whatsoever with these hot food takes at the end, thank you for listening. Hope you had a good 2024. Hope your 2025 is better. We look forward to entertaining you in that year as well. More stuff coming. But yeah, hopefully you had fun with this. We'll probably do another one of these possibly next year around the same time. So look forward to that. Hi, normal audio feed listeners. We don't normally put these in the normal audio feed, by the way. If you enjoyed this, they're over on the YouTube and also on the Patreon page. We keep them out of the normal feed because they're let's call them messier than our normal episodes. And I always fear this being someone's first episode, but I figure putting 2024 in the title for this will let people know this is not the usual for this type of thing. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed. If you're looking for more of these, you now know where to go find them. But yeah, if you feel like supporting the show, there's a Patreon you can go check out. If not, your listening has always been more than enough for us. Happy holidays, happy new year, and anything else from the rest of y'all before we close this out?
I would say, other than like, thank you for tuning in and supporting us, all that. Like, I genuinely, we talk about it, but we genuinely do appreciate you guys supporting us and all that stuff and putting up with our shenanigans, if you will. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. Been a blast playing games for you guys.
I would actually also, I'll throw in here, thanks to you guys here specifically. Like, I generally look forward to our sessions, and so it's nice to see what comes up and what kind of evolves from the stories. And I think we've, like, from the last year, we've grown very much in terms of kind of how we role play and do all that stuff. So yeah, I think definitely appreciate all of you. And we've said it before at the end of the episodes that always fun kind of working with us or with you guys, because it's just, we mesh really well and it's very respectful. But I genuinely do like want to express that sentiment that it's always a blast, doing tabletop with you guys and Charlie, kind of guiding us along on journeys. So
y'all have been some of the most consistent people that I interact with. It is actually kind of surprising to like look back and think of just the fact that like, oh, we talk to each other like every fucking and just meme about and whatnot. So I am very thankful for y'all being part of my life and this just kind of continuing this hobby that I think that like I still think that I'm like just relatively new in, but I don't know. It's been great to just do this. Y'all make it a treat.
And with that, once again, thank you for listening. Look forward to entertaining you next year.